Veterinary Medical Board meeting. We will start with the roll call.
Here.
Ms. Pulaski,
Here.
Dr. Bradbury,
Here.
Mr. Espinoza,
Here.
Dr. Grant,
Here.
Dr. Maniak,
Here.
Dr. Solcito.
Here.
We have a quorum.
So for the first agenda, we would be having the special order of business, which is a hearing on a petition, but we would like to hear from one of our board members.
Madam President, I need to recuse myself on the matter pending because of a conflict of interest.
So noted. Judge?
All right. All right. Good morning. My name is Marcy Larson, and I'm assisting the board this morning with the hearing. Mr. Bly, is it correct?
Blea.
Leah. All right. So we are here. It's January 16th, 2025, in the matter of the petition for early termination or modification filed by Jeffrey Allen Blea. This matter is being heard by the Veterinary Medical Board of California, Department of Consumer Affairs. This is OAH case number 2024-120602, board case number 4602-100-150-1570. The board members have already introduced themselves and we've established a quorum. As I mentioned, my name is Marcy Larson. I'm an administrative law judge with the Office of Administrative Hearings and presiding this morning. May I please take the appearance of the Deputy Attorney General?
Stephanie Alamo Latif, Deputy Attorney General, appearing on behalf of the Attorney General pursuant to Business and Professions Code Section 4887 and Government Code Section 1522, representing the people of the state of California. I'm here today to assist the ALJ and Board in fact-finding. My role is not adversarial, but intended to protect the public interest. Thank you.
Right. And Mr. Blea, you are representing yourself this morning, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you understand you could have had an attorney represent you at your own expense,
Correct.
and you're choosing to proceed on your own behalf.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. I see that you have documents in front of you. You're going to need the petition documents that are going to be presented into evidence. So I'm just going to briefly explain how the hearing will proceed this morning. And if anyone has any questions, you can ask me after that explanation. We are here today, of course, because you're petitioning the board to either have your probation modified or terminated early. You have the burden of proving that your petition should be granted, Mr. Blea. Ms. Alamo Latif will first give the board members a brief overview of the history of discipline of your license, and then she will address the exhibits in the petition package. For each of those exhibits, I will ask you if you have reviewed the exhibit and if you have any objection to the exhibit. So I go through that process with each exhibit. After Ms. Alamo Latif is done presenting the evidence to the board members, I will swear you in, and you may provide the board members any testimony you wish for them to consider for purposes of issuing a decision on your petition. The board members are primarily concerned about the rehabilitation you've undertaken since the discipline of your license. Any information you believe would be helpful for them to know in support of your petition. Once you have done providing your own testimony, I will ask Ms. Alamo Latif if she has any questions for you. And then I will ask the board members if they have questions for you. After you've done providing all of your testimony, you and Ms. Alamo Latif, if you wish, may give the board members a brief closing remarks. You will not receive a decision today after the matter has been submitted for the board's consideration. We will go into closed session, the board will deliberate, and will issue a written decision. During this proceeding, I cannot give any legal advice, but if either of you have any questions about the procedures, please ask me, and if I can answer the question, I will. All right, I know that was a lot of information. Any questions from me before we get started?
No, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Alamo Latif, if you would please give the board members a brief overview of the history of discipline in this matter.
Yes, thank you. Petitioner was issued veterinarian license number VET 11928 on September 16, 1993. On January 3rd, 2022, An ex parte petition for interim suspension order was granted, suspending petitioner's license pending a full administrative determination, or unless otherwise ordered following a noticed hearing on the petition. On January 28th, 2022, the noticed interim suspension order was granted, suspending petitioner's license pending a full administrative determination. On February 11th, 2022, a first amended accusation was filed against petitioner, alleging violations of the Veterinary Medicine Practice Act. Effective September 21st, 2022, the board adopted a stipulated settlement, placing petitioner's license on probation for 3 years with terms and conditions. The projected end date of the probation is September of 2025. Petitioner signed the petition for early termination or modification of probation on September 24th, 2024. The request is based upon his petition and supporting documents identified in Exhibits 4 through 12. Thank you. Oh, because the burden is on petitioner, I have no further statements, but reserve the right to question petitioner.
All right, Ms. Alamo Latif, if you would please address the exhibits.
Yes. What's been pre-marked as Exhibit 1 are the jurisdictional documents, the notices of hearing, and proof of service. I move to admit Exhibit 1 into evidence for jurisdictional purposes.
And Mr. Bly, I'm going to ask, you have the exhibits in front of you, correct?
Correct.
All right, any objection to the notice of hearing?
No.
Objection 1, I'm sorry, Exhibit 1 is admitted.
What's been pre-marked as Exhibit 2 is the certification of license history for petitioner. I move to admit Exhibit 2 into evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit 2 is admitted.
What's been pre-marked as Exhibit 3 is the decision and order adopting the stipulated settlement effective September 21st, 2022. Also included in Exhibit 3 is the first amended accusation, number 4602-021-001570, filed February 11th, 2022. Also included in Exhibit 3 is the order granting the petition for interim suspension dated January 3rd, 2022. I move to admit Exhibit 3 into evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit 3 is admitted.
What's been pre-marked as Exhibit 4 is petitioner's petition for early termination or modification of probation. I move to admit Exhibit 4 into evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit 4 is admitted.
What's been pre-marked as Exhibit 5 is petitioner's narrative statement. I move to admit Exhibit 5 into evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit 5 is admitted.
What's been pre-marked as Exhibit 6 are 5 letters of recommendation submitted by petitioner. I move to admit Exhibit 6 into evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit 6 is admitted.
What's been pre-marked as Exhibit 7 is petitioner's CV resume. I move to admit Exhibit 7 into evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit 7 is admitted.
What's been pre-marked as Exhibit 8 is cost recovery payment information showing that petitioner has paid the full costs owed. I move to admit Exhibit 8 into evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit 8 is admitted.
What's been pre-marked as Exhibit 9 are 30 continuing education certificates. I move to admit Exhibit 9 into evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit 9 is admitted.
What's been pre-marked as Exhibit 10 are performance evaluations from May 2022 through April 2023 and May 2023 through April 2024, and petitioner's job description. I move to admit Exhibit 10 into evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit 10 is admitted.
What's been pre-marked as Exhibit 11 is AAEP information regarding roundtable conferences. I move to admit Exhibit 11 into evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit 11 is admitted.
What's been pre-marked as Exhibit 12 is various correspondence related to regulatory and compounding information and issues. I move to admit Exhibit 12 into evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit 12 is admitted.
What's been pre-marked as Exhibit 13 is a probation compliance report showing that petitioner is currently in compliance with all terms and conditions of his probation. I move to admit Exhibit 13 into evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit 13 is admitted.
That concludes all the exhibits today. Thank you.
Great. It's now your opportunity to testify on your own behalf. And so I'm going to have you stand up. I'm going to swear you in. Right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
You may have a seat. Please state and spell your name.
My name is Dr. Jeff Blea, Blea.
Right, Dr. Balea, just a reminder, this is your opportunity to provide any information in the form of your testimony to the board members that you believe will assist them in making a decision today. I'm just going to ask you just to remember to keep your voice up and speak a little more slowly than you would probably in a conversation. And the reason for that is that we're all following along. I'm taking notes and we want to make sure we can hear you clearly. All right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you, Doctor. You may begin.
Is it safe to understand that all the board members have the petition package?
They in fact do. And
Okay.
so to that extent, you don't need to necessarily cover everything that's in the petition package because of course they have the benefit of all of that documentation. But if there are particular things that you want to highlight for the board members, of course, this is your opportunity to do that.
Thank you. I didn't want to be redundant.
Exactly. And I appreciate that. Thank you for asking.
So as in my defense, as my request for early termination and probation, December 2021, I was notified of an ISO hearing. January 3rd, a ruling was issued by the administrative law judge to suspend my license. That ruling is reaffirmed at the end of January. In August, I signed a settlement agreement, which went into effect in September of 2022. So as I went through the process in my probation intake hearing, I was informed that after 2 years of probation, I can apply for early termination of probation. I felt that going back to the January 21 date through January 2025, I felt I have very studiously served my 3 years of probation and engaged in rehabilitation, which was worthy of an early termination request. Obviously, the 3 years ends in September of this year. However, I felt I would go ahead and file the petition for early termination, even though it's only a few months prior to the 3-year period. In that 3 years, I'll back up. In the year 2022, I was somewhat taken aback of the allegations. However, I spent the 9 months with my license suspended, reviewing my records, reviewing our practice records, reviewing what we were doing, what were the issues, what were the problems, what were the misgivings. I try to understand where the issues were regarding record keeping. Upon my reinstatement under the settlement agreement in September of 2022, I embarked on a very vigorous and conscious effort to learn more about record keeping from a continuing education standpoint. In the fall of 2022, the AVMA had a webinar for their constituents. They asked me to serve on a panel about record keeping. I learned a lot in the 9 months that I was suspended. I agreed to do it. That followed up with 8 continuing hours of continuing education on record keeping in 2022, I believe, a 2-hour course and a 6-hour course. Following that in 2023, I attended a webinar as a participant through the AVMA on record keeping in conjunction, I believe, with AEP. I also gave a table topic with Dr. Cynthia McKenzie from AVMA at the AEP National Convention, which hosts approximately 5,000 members, not only equine members, but industry members. Following that table topic, I did a 1-hour webinar on record keeping with Dr. McKenzie, which was attended approximately by 50 to 100 participants in December of 2023. In 2024, at the AEP National Convention, AAEP stands for American Association of Equine Practitioners, of which I am a member, a past president, and a past member of their board of directors. They elected to put on a business session regarding record keeping for veterinarians, primarily because leadership was concerned that equine veterinarians and practitioners were not aware of the Practice Act in their specific states, not to mention many equine veterinarians practice in multiple states. So it was an effort by leadership of the AAEP to bring forth record keeping and veterinary practice acts in front of their membership. They put together, as part of their continuing education program, a 3.5-hour session, business session on record keeping. The program moderator asked me to provide or to participate in that session. I was extremely reluctant to do it. They would requested that I perform or provide a talk, including a published paper on record keeping from the racetrack perspective. That session included record keeping from the racetrack perspective, record keeping from sports horse perspective from someone on the East Coast, and record keeping from a single practitioner, in addition to an attorney who's familiar with record keeping violations. Following the presentation of a 25, 30-minute PowerPoint presentation, we had a panel discussion for a Q&A with the audience. There were approximately 200 to 250 members in that session. That paper has also been published in the AAEP Annual Proceedings 2024. That's been my effort on record keeping. Excuse me. The fires down south have somewhat affected everyone's vocal cords. In addition to record keeping, in my role as equine medical director, is to serve as a liaison for the California Horse Racing Board. Whether you're a fan of horse racing or opposed to horse racing, my job is to serve as a liaison specifically to the drug testing lab, the MADI lab at UC Davis, in addition to providing scientific expertise on policy and regulations, as well as oversight and involvement with the CAF's California Animal Food and Health Safety Program, not only, not only at UC Davis, but at other branches throughout the state. So part of my job is to facilitate and liaison to CHRB. In my role, I've taken a very conscientious and respectful position to help other practitioners, specifically on the racetrack, understand what's required for your record keeping. The racetrack in California in 2019-20, currently on the racetrack, which is a very tightly regulated sport, every practitioner is required per CHRB law and rules and regulations who have plenary authority over racing. Every practitioner is required to provide and report any medication administered or prescribed, the name of the horse, the time of the treatment, the date of the treatment, the location, and the trainer who is the authorized agent or quote unquote the client by 10 a.m. the following day. That policy has been in place for many years. In 2019 and 20, the effort was to move away from paper recording to electronic reporting to the CHRB. I worked with the data company to beta test a system to help enhance not only record reporting, but record keeping. That system was put into place, I think, in 2020, perhaps. Since that time, we moved on to a sort of 2.0 for record keeping. That system itself has enhanced record keeping on the racetrack. However, I personally take a strong interest in helping practitioners understand what's required, not only for the California Horse Racing Board, but what's required by the Veterinary Medical Practice Act in California to make sure that you adhere and are compliant with record keeping requirements, specifically on the racetrack or in a herd type setting. So I do that on a daily basis. I serve as a resource to practitioners on record keeping. I serve as a resource to practitioners on the Practice Act. I keep a current copy in my files I have for the last 3 years. I also serve as a resource to veterinarians on the racetrack regarding compounding and compounding laws. Compounding is very confusing, but I've been able to explain to them the difference between a patient stock versus an office stock. The GFI, I've sent the GFI to all the practitioners so that they're aware of how to use the GFI and how to look at compounds that are being evaluated to be compounded under bulk substances being reviewed by the FDA. So I constantly serve as a resource to the practitioners to better racetrack practice on the racetrack, to make the racing industry, to elevate the industry, but to make the racing industry, enable it to develop a social license to operate. Further to that, I'm involved with UC Davis. I don't remember, but I think in 2024, I was co-author on 4 published papers, most of which are related to medication issues, targeted testing, things like that. That's part of my job as far as my association with the Matty Lab. I continue to stay involved with organized veterinary medicine. I believe as a veterinarian, anybody that graduates from veterinary school and works for a client on an animal ought to give something back to the profession. And throughout my career, I've had some incredible mentors who have been and become friends who have taught me to give back to the profession. I lived my career leading by example, and I've continued to do that since I've been since I signed the stipulated settlement, and therefore I respectfully request early termination of my probation. The other reason I wanted to request this was if you all have questions, I'm here and happy to answer any questions.
All right, Ms. Al-Latif, any questions?
Yes, thank you. Dr. Blea, your narrative statement contained in Exhibit 5 states that you continue to educate yourself and other practitioners on the requirements and regulations of the California Veterinary Medical Act. The first amended accusation that led to the discipline of the license contained violations for prescribing, dispensing, and administering controlled substances, dangerous drugs, and non-FDA approved drugs to racehorses without an examination or medical necessity. What have you done to specifically address those violations?
I left private practice in July of 2021. Therefore, I do not treat any animals, nor do I practice veterinary medicine in the traditional sense. So from a hands-on perspective, I don't practice. I left practice in 2021. In fact, I left practice and took the equine medical director job July 1st, 2021, prior to the ISO of my license in January of 2022. To answer your question, regarding non-FDA approved drugs, when I returned back in September 22, CHRB's interpretation of 1867, which is non-FDA drugs are not permitted. The interpretation was, per CHRB historical notes and references, CHRB permitted compounded drugs, provided they were compounded according to state and federal regulations. That was the interpretation of CHRB, and that's what practitioners and myself were taught and trained by the administrative body that regulated racing according to what we understood. 2022 of September, CHRB worked with the Veterinary Medical Board, the MDC, including your executive director, Jessica Sieferman, Dr. Richard Sullivan, to try and write language to allow for the use of compounding medication in CHRB 1867 with specific language stating what is permitted and what is not permitted. That rule change went into effect. Non-FDA approved medications, for example, compounded medications, are now permitted under CHRB rule, provided they meet the language set forth in the rule.
Okay. You said that you advise various different stakeholders, the industry practitioners, and your liaison between UCD and the CHRB and various different entities. So what do you do to educate other practitioners about the necessity for a medical examination and no prescribing or administering controlled substances without a medical necessity.
So, and this is going to touch base a little bit on your first question. No prescribing dangerous drugs without an examination. And one thing, the racetrack and the equine world, especially show barns, large show barns, but I'm just going to focus on the racetrack. The racetrack, for example, Santa Anita, the backside of the racetrack is approximately 45 acres. So it's not very big. In that area, there's approximately 2,000 horses. On the racetrack, the client for the veterinarian is typically the trainer, and the client, which is the new addition, as to the client is the individual who takes responsibility for that animal when he presents that, or she presents that animal to the veterinarian for treatment or care. The client on the racetrack is the trainer. The owner, which are often absentee owners or large groups or so forth, is not typically who the veterinarian dealt with on the racetrack. The veterinarian deals with the client, quote unquote, which is the trainer. The veterinarian is there on a daily basis examining those horses. So to your question, I was at the racetrack daily. I had a specific set of clients that I saw on a daily basis. Many of my patients I saw more than once a day. I knew their history. I was authorized to perform treatments. I made daily, if not multiple visits during the day, and I took responsibility for the treatments that I recommended or prescribed. Therefore, I had a VCPR with those clients. The examinations were done. However, based on the allegations, they were not recorded properly. And that's one of the things that I learned in the 9 months that I was suspended. Okay, I'm seeing these horses every day. There's an exam done when they come in. I was erroneously, I looked at it as a continuum of an exam, that I'm there every day. I see them every day. I check in on them every day. I talk to the grooms that take care of them, the riders that ride them, the assistant trainers that deal with them, the trainers that deal with them, and the owner. What I learned was I wasn't recording that information in my record on a daily basis. Some days, some records were much, much better than others. Some, if it was just a cursory endoscopic exam, I didn't record. I would record my findings, but not the fact that I did a physical exam on the horse or why I was doing that. And those were the things that I learned during that 9 months. So learning those things and taking these CE courses on continuing education, and I've taken 18 hours. It took 8 hours in 2022. It took 10 hours in 2023. But what I've explained to practitioners, and when they show me records, I ask them, okay, you've got a record. It tells me who the owner is, the trainer is, the age, the breed, the sex. That's all the digital connection. That's all in through Jockey Club or Equitaps or CHR. But basically, the KISS principle, you got to keep it simple. And what I tell practitioners is, okay, I'm looking at your records, but where's your soap? And that's one thing that I think we all learned in vet school: do a soap, do a soap, do a soap. When you're going all day, every day, you see these same horses day in and day out. You're not doing soaps every day. Well, guess what? You need to do a soap every day for every horse you look at, every horse you treat. It doesn't have to be expensive, but you have to do a soap. Subjective, objective assessment. What's your plan? And it's very simple, because you're communicating that with the client, the trainer, or the assistant trainer, but you're not writing it down. And you're also reporting it to a different regulatory agency, but you're not including the basic principle of the soap. So what I tell practitioners, do a soap. It's very simple. Do a soap. Do your records while you're at the barn, or when you're going between barns, which may be all of 30 feet. You may have 30 horses in the barn you're looking at or vaccinating. Take the time, do your records. Our electronic system now facilitates that quite a bit. You can put in a soap, you can put in your findings. Everything that you can add is in there. I tell practitioners, do your records same day. They have to be timely, accurate, and factual. I tell practitioners, you can't take them home. We're mobile, so to speak, so get them done within the day. Theoretically, you want them done within 24 hours. 24 hours, you're required by CHRB. 24 hours, your medical record should be the same. In addition to that, they also have to keep medical records for HISA, which is a federal authority that has been put into place that now regulates horse racing. So they're inundated with records. So my approach is do your SOAP, get your SOAPs done, keep it simple, include your comments, include your findings. And those are some of the things that I will relay to practitioners to facilitate their day. Templates are very, very helpful. And I'm not talking about the same TPR for every horse. I'm talking about templates for common procedures and techniques, castrations, endoscopies, radiographs, ultrasounds, joint injections, CASLICs, vaccination protocols. I talked to him about getting client consent. If you're doing a castration, you want to provide a consent that the client, being the trainer, understands what could happen, what could go wrong, the possible negative outcomes. You never want to promise a good outcome, but you also want to let them know what to do, what to expect if there are complications. Controlled drug laws. I talked to practitioners about keeping a compounding formulary. If you give a vitamin shot and mix 3 different vitamins, that's compounding. You need to have a formulary in your practice or on your vehicle to indicate what each amount of each medication is included in that medication. So different things like that to assist practitioners.
Thank you. So what I interpret from your answer is that your position is that you were conducting the examinations, you just weren't documenting those. In short, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
And I did have a VCPR with my clients, but that was also not documented.
There were also violations in the first amended accusation related to treatments of clusters of equine patients at the same time at the request of the trainers without a medical necessity. So based upon your answer, do I understand that because you were seeing these patients day in and day out, like you said, very daily, you were familiar with their medical background, so you basically already knew what the treatment was, you already knew what was necessary, even though you weren't documenting that, you did determine that there was a medical necessity for those different medications?
Correct. And as an example, a barn that I took care of had about 50 horses. We knew the horses, the trainer and I would have the conference, discuss which horses that we felt they're in a barn, they're in a 12 by 12 stall, they train, they're on a high carbohydrate ration. Which horses, based upon our impression, specifically my clinical impression, were likely to have gastric ulcers based on years of scoping horses. So we would determine which horses, based on their personality, their clinical signs, their appetite, would presumptively have gastric ulcers. We would then put those horses on a gastro or ulcer preventative medication, GastroGuard, so that we would do that on a weekly basis. And we'd go through who's still in the barn. This one's still in the barn. Where they're training. Okay, let's keep them on. We keep them on GastroGuard. So we knew those. The exam was not the traditional exam. The exam was actually more in depth and over a longer period of time, but it wasn't the traditional exam.
Thank you. So I would like to talk about your CE certificates. And those are contained in Exhibit 9. The probation compliance report that is contained in Exhibit 13 required you to take, it says that you took record-keeping courses in October of 2022, December 2022, and November of 2023 pursuant to Term 17 of the stipulated settlement. Now, Exhibit 9, the first 3 pages, has 3 certificates of completion, and those are dated the exact same dates as referenced in the probation compliance report. Is it fair to say that those first 3 certificates were taken for purposes of satisfying that probation term?
Yes.
Now, page 6 of Exhibit 9 contains an ethics training for state officials taken on August 13th, 2021. That was prior to you beginning your probation term, correct?
Correct.
And during your testimony, you stated that while your license was suspended between January and September of 2022, you learned a lot about record keeping.
Correct.
In my brief review of the CE certificates, I don't see any certificates that you completed any courses in record keeping during that time. So what did you do to educate yourself about record keeping during that time while your license was suspended?
From January to September of 2022, my license was suspended. I was scared to death to take any record-keeping CE for veterinarians because in January of 2022, per Michael Yee, I was the Deputy Attorney General. I was told if I hold myself out in any way as a DBM using letters or any way per statute 4837 or some, I don't recall the statute, he would file a practicing without a license complaint against me and I would lose my license permanently. So I was not able to take any continuing education during that period as a veterinarian. What I did was I went through the Practice Act and learned what it meant to fulfill the requirements of the Veterinary Practice Act in California. I also looked at practice acts in other states, Kentucky, Texas, Florida, and New York, but focused mainly on the Veterinary Medical Practice Act in California.
Thank you. Now, you talked about a little bit about the AAEP roundtable information. You both attended and presented at those roundtables, correct?
One of them I presented, I believe, in 2022 and 2023. I was just an attendee.
Okay. And did you formulate your own presentation on the record keeping that you said that you were a presenter? Where did you, or did you do that in collaboration with someone? Where did you get that information?
I created my own my own presentation, and then I worked with Dr. Cynthia McKenzie as to how we were going to present it as a team.
Now, I'd like to discuss some of your letters of recommendation. There's a letter from Heather Kinch, K-Y-N-C, I don't know if I'm saying that last name correct, contained in Exhibit 6. It discusses a study in 2023 related to the Breeders' Cup races. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yes, Dr. Kinich is the pharmacologist at the Maddie Lab at UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine. So the racing industry in California is quite progressive. At Santa Anita, to address musculoskeletal injuries, on the backside we have a nuclear scintigraphy, a standing MRI, and a PET, standing PET machine, a positron emission tomography unit. So the practitioners through the Southern California Equine Foundation utilize that equipment to identify musculoskeletal injuries before they become problematic, before the horse gets injured and requires surgery. The reason we set up that study was the Breeders' Cup was coming to Santa Anita in 2023. We have that equipment on the backside at Santa Anita. In our regulatory role, we look at all participants in the Breeders' Cup, which is over 200 entries. It essentially boils down to about 140 horses in a week to 2 week period of time. I wanted to be able, if there were horses that we felt that we, being the regulatory veterinarians, felt were at risk for injury, specifically to their fetlock or cannon bones, we would have the ability to put them into the PET machine or the positron emission tomography unit. In order to do these diagnostics, the horses have to be sedated. And when you're dealing with horse racing or any sort of regulated sport, drug violations are a major problem. So I wanted to know how close prior to the race we could get any at-risk horse into those diagnostic modalities without creating a potential for a drug violation for those individuals that own and train the horse. So that was the basis of the study, to determine what would be our hard stop day prior to the race if we wanted to do those diagnostics and not risk a drug violation.
What was the outcome of the study?
96 hours, 4 days.
Did you educate other practitioners and share what you learned?
I informed the Diagnostic Imaging Center at 96 hours, you should not be using Torbagesic. I also talked to 2 different practitioners and told them if we're going to do a PET, we cannot use butorphanol.
The letter also talks about your investigation into sudden deaths in racehorses and to determine if the sudden deaths are a result of administration of therapeutic or non-therapeutic substances. Can you explain a little bit more about this?
Sudden death in sport is a very frustrating event. It happens in horse racing. It happens in performance horse racing. It happens in 3-day events. It happens, sadly to say, in college athletics. It's a very significant problem in college athletics. I've been looking into sudden death as far as trying to understand it. It's very complicated, but sudden death in an athlete, whether it's equine or human, or even canine, is exercise associated sudden death within 1 hour of exercise. I've looked into a lot of different aspects of it. Is it metabolic? Is it cardiac? Is it cardiopulmonary? Is it hemorrhagic? What's organ systems? I'm working with some sensor companies to put on horses to identify EKGs in real time to see if there's a conduction through the AV node abnormality that may occur and what the electrolytes look like at that period of time. We just, we submitted and got approved for a CEH grant up at UC Davis, putting horses on the treadmill to try to identify what that cardiac function is, what the electrolyte abnormalities may be. Sudden death is frustrating because oftentimes on the racetrack, every horse that dies or euthanized has a full necropsy performed. Sudden death, 56% of the time goes undiagnosed. So that means less than half the time we understand what happened, but greater than half the time we don't know what happened. So there is a large amount of money being dedicated to sudden death research. In California, our numbers will range from anywhere to 8 to 12% of our fatalities a year. We started looking at it. We being UC Davis, are working collaboratively with Cornell, University of Cornell, New York, as well as a university in England. Further to that, we started looking at metabolomics because when I looked into it and researched it, I'm curious as to if we can identify something in metabolomics that could identify horses that are at risk for sudden death episodes. We can pull them from the racing population and better monitor them in a different discipline or sport.
So your study is currently ongoing. You just got a grant recently.
We have a study ongoing at UC Davis with 12 horses with Arano sensors and doing serum blood chemistries while they're on the treadmill for a 12-week program, yes. I'm also involved with a study through University of Minnesota and Penn, where they're looking at sudden death. HISA, Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority, is also part of that study as well.
What do you plan to do with the outcome of the studies?
With research, you always be careful what you ask for because you never know what the outcome is. So it's difficult to answer that question because I don't know what the outcome is going to be.
Thank you. The recommendation letter also talks about publishing 4 manuscripts on the topic of anti-doping and medication control in the last 2 years. You collaborated with other practitioners on these publications, is that correct?
2024, no, I wasn't collaborating. There was a ketofen paper. There was a oligonucleotide paper. There was a pivocaine or carbocaine paper with epinephrine, and there was an ethylene glucuronide paper. So no, I was not collaborating as a practitioner on those papers.
So the ones that she referenced, how were you involved in those?
Which ones did she reference? The EIPH paper or the corticosteroid paper?
So doctor, you can look at the letter yourself. It's in Exhibit 9. You have that in front of you. And
And Exhibit 6.
Exhibit 6, how far in to Exhibit 6?
I have it.
Okay, thank you. And also, Ms. Alamo Latif, I just want to remind you that we need to make sure we leave plenty of time for the board members to ask questions as well. All right, thank you.
Okay, the 2015 was an intra-articular corticosteroids, which I participated in as a practitioner, as well as the EIPH study to investigate a different approach to administration of furosemide. I did participate as a practitioner on both of those projects.
All right, moving on to Exhibit 10, their performance evaluation from May 2022 through April 2023 states that you returned from administrative leave on September 21st, 2023. When did you begin your administrative leave?
Would have been January of 2022. I don't know the exact date.
So between January 2022 and September of 2023, you were on administrative leave?
No, January of 2022 to September of 2022. I was on administrative leave.
Okay. So if you can turn to Exhibit 10, first page. Kind of in the middle of the page, it says employee comments. It says return from administrative leave on 9/21/23. Is that incorrect?
Let me find it. Mm. And what page did you say that?
Um, I don't know if you have the Bates stamped exact ones. It's right here.
Employee comments. First page. Yes, that is incorrect.
Okay,
In fact, the period at the top of the page is 5/1/2022 to 4/30/23. So Dr. Pasco wrote down the wrong year.
okay. So you're on administrative leave for the term that your license was suspended. Is that
Correct.
correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And what did you do when you were on administrative leave? If anything?
It was the 9 months where my license was suspended, so I spent 9 months trying to figure out what this was all about and what happened, and a lot of phone calls with attorneys, a lot of time spent looking through the Practice Act to understand what initiated all of this or what this was all about.
All right,
And I did a lot of walking, which I still do a lot of walking.
thank you. You agreed to serve 3 years of probation. Why should the board grant your request to terminate probation early?
I would request the board grant my early termination based on the fact that I've consciously and aggressively taken an approach to not only improve my colleagues, but to better the profession. And I've taken it very seriously to show that my efforts have elevated not only the profession, but the standard of care for equine, not only on the racetrack, but throughout the state of California.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. I'm going to start to my left with our president. Any questions? And to my right? No questions? Yes,
Good morning.
just state your name.
Oh, Christina Bradbury.
Yeah.
Hi, Dr. Blea. Thank you for coming today. This must have been a really difficult time for you. I had one question about thyroxine and that I think it is, at least just from my understanding, probably overprescribed in the racing world. Has that been your experience? And were you prescribing thyroxine with confirmed hypothyroidism in these horses, or how was your prescriptions of thyroxine being determined?
Thank you. So This may take an hour to answer this, but it's a good question, and I appreciate it. Hypothyroidism in horses is rare. Hypothyroidism in horses is often seen in older horses with hyperinsulinemia, with pituitary issues and disorders. Oftentimes, where thyroid hormones were prescribed at the racetrack, and I can tell you in my experience, in my opinion, and how I used it, the one time that I used it in my allegations, it was used following a period of time where a young horse would come in, would exercise and train, but was unable to get fit or struggled with quote unquote weight loss. And, we look at Ozempic around the world, but we were very discriminate in our practice as to which horses we would administer thyroxine to. The one that I did, I think we pulled a T3, T4 2 or 3 months prior to me finally prescribing that Thyroel product because we wanted to see what that horse was going to do. In 2014 and in 2016, CHRB issued an advisory to veterinarians that any prescription of thyroxine hormone products must adhere to the rules and regulations by the CHRB, which included blood work, length of prescription, documented reason for putting a horse on Thyroel. All that is in my records. I had one horse that was in my complaint. We had a T3, T4. We had a documentation. I had a drug consultation in my records. So that was all in there. Do I think Thyroel is overprescribed? Not anymore. There were some references in 2019 and 2021 that there was a lot of thyroxine or Thyroel being prescribed at the racetrack. Some people claim that that was the smoking gun that was killing horses on the racetrack. I don't believe that's the case based on my experience and my knowledge. However, there was they were keeping track of the number of prescriptions. There were 256 prescriptions in 2020 out of, I don't know how many race starts or 2,000 horses, what have you. 256 prescriptions involving 21 veterinarians. 80% of those prescriptions were by, I think, 3 veterinarians. I had one of the 256, and therefore the complaint was brought about. But the bigger issue, thyroxine, I think we're well beyond that now because of many of the things that have been in the press. But the bigger issue with thyroxine, specifically Thyroel, is it's misbranded. It's a misbranded drug. And if you look at Thyroel, now Thyroel is levothyroxine, which is made, and there's 2 or 3 companies that make it, but Thyroel is made by Lloyd's. Lloyd's also makes a small animal levothyroxine tablet. Lloyd's makes a levothyroxine powder for the use and treatment of hypothyroidism in horses. Well, hypothyroidism in horses doesn't really exist. When you read the label, it also says Thyroel is only available under the prescription of a licensed veterinarian. I'll be very honest and very frank. I had no idea Thyroel was not FDA approved. I had no idea it was not misbranded. I don't think many practitioners knew Thyroel was misbranded and therefore not FDA approved. One of the things I've learned, one of the things I've shared with colleagues, I still have debates with colleagues across the country who still use it. And I keep explaining to them it is misbranded. It is non-FDA approved, therefore you cannot use it. They set up a booth at trade shows to sell Thyroel with a big poster. So no, I don't think it's being used. When I came back, I noticed there was 1 or 2 that I saw. We filed complaints against them, CHRB. So there was a lot to that. Misbranded because it's misbranded. It is not FDA approved because it's not FDA approved. It's not allowed to be used on the racetrack. I can tell you, it is being used ubiquitously around the country for older age horses for insulin disorders and pituitary disorders. At the time that I looked into all this, it was even being prescribed by several veterinary schools, unaware that it was misbranded, therefore not FDA approved.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And just, I'm glad that you continue to do work for the horses, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Morning, Doctor.
Good morning.
In your original stipulation, you acknowledged that the complainant, the board, could establish a factual basis for the charges in the first amended accusation. Do you recall stipulating that back in August of 2022?
No, I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, I mean, the reason why you were placed on probation is because you entered a stipulated agreement, correct?
Correct.
And there were accusations against you that you stipulated to.
7 causes of discipline, yes.
And when you reached that stipulation, did you agree that there was evidence for all 7 of those accusations against you? Wasn't that part of your agreement?
I'd have to reread the agreement. I relied on my attorneys, to be quite honest with you. But if that's what the agreement says and that's what I signed, yes.
Well, do you know what you were placed on probation for? What some of the serious accusations were?
Yes, I do.
And do you understand now you're asking us to terminate your probation earlier because you've already demonstrated reform for those accusations or those violations, correct?
Yes, correct.
That's why you're here.
Correct.
And so is it your contention that you were not in violation of one of those allegations, particularly the allegation that you prescribed and administered medication without an examination or medical necessity? Do you contest that? Do you claim now that you were not in violation?
I was in violation for not recording that information, correct. And because it was not recorded, when it's reviewed, it did not exist.
But wasn't that a separate allegation? The record keeping was a separate allegation than the underlying allegation that you basically prescribed medication without medical necessity or examination?
I think it's all tied together
Well, yes, but it was,
because you
Wasn't-
had negligence for performing an exam without a diagnosis, which I would, I don't say that's accurate. There was unprofessional conduct, 3 different counts. There was record keeping and 2 violations of the Practice Act for drug consultation and record keeping. And some of my records included drug consultations, some of them didn't. So that was the admissions on the settlement, this is how it's going to be.
and I acknowledge, I mean, you've done a lot with respect to the record keeping allegation, but what is not clear to me is, are you coming before the board today asking for early termination of probation and claiming that you've been reformed for the specific allegation that basically that you administered medication without an examination or medical necessity? Have you reformed in that way at all?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a bit rhetorical. One, I'll use this as an example. One, I wasn't practicing, number one. Secondly, if I were to do it all over again, I would change the way I do it to address these 7 specific allegations based upon what I've learned. I think the difficulty in answering your question is this was all, and you're an attorney if I'm correct. Is that correct?
Yes.
The difficulty in going through this process was this was all discussed by the attorneys. I just sat there and was advised. And to Dr. Bradbury's comment, she asked a question, so I wanted to address it. I am in no way saying that I'm not arguing the ISO charges, and I'm not arguing the 7 causes of discipline by the Veterinary Medical Board in the First Amendment accusation. I'm not here to do that. I'm here to tell you, this is what I've done in the last 3 years to elevate the profession and elevate the standard of care for not only racehorses, but horses. I'm not here to recirculate all of that. I said, if you all have questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I'm not here to argue either the ISO or the stipulated settlement. I'm here to tell you, this is what I've done to make things better. And this is what I've learned to help people to give back to the profession. Because I believe, honesty, integrity, and integrity is important, but it's often viewed through leadership. So someone has to lead. And I think that's important.
Just one last follow-up question. Do you maintain that there were portions of your stipulation that you did not understand, but that you relied on your attorney, and that there was some confusion or lack of communication about what you were being accused of and what violations you were admitting?
No, I would disagree with that statement.
Then it wasn't clear to me, what was the confusion? You said it was kind of writing
Well,
agreement.
a good example is the VCPR. I was accused of not having a VCPR. And I think in some of my testimony today, I think I pretty well defended that I did in fact have a VCPR. But no one ever spoke to me. No one ever asked me. It became a game of attorneys and settlements and cost. And so I'm not arguing those 7 causes of discipline. I'm not arguing the record keeping. What I replied to earlier was, some of those I don't think were accurate. I'm not saying they were wrong, but I don't think they were completely accurate.
Thank you.
All right, any additional questions from our board members? All right, any follow-up? Oh, you do? Yes, of course.
Good morning, Dr. Play. Yeah, just with regards to the record keeping aspect, and I would say that is actually very enlightening that, after you're going through this process, there's a lot of recognition of gaps, in the actual practice, and especially in the record keeping. And with all the efforts that you've made, I wanted to know, how is that being received by the equine community, about now that you're advocating for better record keeping? How is that being received by the community?
With open arms and welcoming. And again, the onus is on the practitioner. You need to know your practice act. You need to pay attention to it. Everybody gets busy. Everybody hates doing records at midnight every night, but the onus is on the practitioner. And, I think, in fact, I will confidently state that it was a rude awakening for a lot of them that have embraced it.
Thank you very much.
Yes, of course.
I think to Mr. Espinoza's point, we have a saying in veterinary medicine, if it's not in the record, it didn't happen. So that's something that you can go away with and move forward, and you understand, and you think that you've learned that.
Oh, I've learned that, and that's part of Mr. Espinoza's comments, because even though I knew these things and could defend these things, it wasn't in the record. In fact, if you look at some of my presentations, if it's not in the record, it didn't happen. I pontificate that all the time.
All right, any follow-up questions, Ms. Alamo Latif?
No, Your Honor.
Anything in addition you would like to add, Doctor?
No, Your Honor.
All right, any closing remarks, Ms. Alamo Latif?
No, Your Honor.
Any closing remarks, Doctor?
Thank you for the opportunity to appear here today before you. I appreciate it, and I appreciate what you do. Thank you.
All right, matter submitted. Matter submitted, Doctor, to the board for consideration. Matter submitted, yes.
Yes.
All right, matter submitted, and the record is closed. Thank you. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to our president.
Now we're going to go into closed session, so we would be back at, Jessica, what time do you think we're going to be back?
So we won't set a time because it depends on the matters in closed session, which will include the deliberation on this petition and other disciplinary matters.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. All right, good morning. We are going to reconvene open session. And we will start with what we missed yesterday with agenda number 9.
All right. So members, at this point, there are still no piece of legislation introduced, but we list these in case that there are by the time of this meeting. And if the board wants to discuss any of the potential legislation that we hear is going to be introduced, the deadline for introducing bills is February 21st. So although there's not any introduced at this time, we do fully expect a legislation to be introduced for at least one, if not all, of the issues in front of you. The first one is our sunset bill. That one, when it's introduced, is typically going to be a spot bill touching our controlling statute. And the substantive changes typically don't go into the sunset bill until after our sunset hearing, which will happen likely in March. So with that, I'll just move through all of them and then you can discuss which ones you want to. The next one is about the potential for legislation related to licensed chiropractors practicing on animals. We did mention in here the meetings with Senator Chobo's office, which Dr. Bradbury and Dr. Solocito had been involved with. Along with the Board of Chiropractic Examiners were also involved in those meetings, and representatives from the Chiropractic Association and CVMA also participated in those. We still have not seen any draft legislation, but we're told that what others have seen are very similar to Ohio, which is why I linked that law in there so you can get an idea of what it could look like. Dr. Solocito or Dr. Bradbury, would you like to add to those discussions? Any summaries?
At this time, I feel like I'm still kind of getting familiar with all the conversations. So yeah, I really don't have anything to add.
So I appreciated I appreciated the outreach, and the continued outreach from the senator's office, early on, and the chiropractic board. I feel like not a lot was said except for the gentleman who is presenting. I can't recall his name, but he seems to be the author who is planning on being the author.
Potentially a sponsor.
Okay. So I always get that backwards. In any case, he seemed to at least portray that he was genuinely interested in feedback and with working with boards to, make it as consumer protection oriented as possible. I relayed some of our concerns after our conversation here. No one else really talked about concerns, I feel like, except for the comments about taking radiographs, and they responded that there was room to write that in the legislation, that would be prohibited as a possibility. My overall, I think that the Ohio language is under the chiropractic board, right?
Yes.
And I think, after our presentations yesterday, and these conversations, it may behoove us, just my opinion, to try and actually incorporate this under our Practice Act, rather than let this kind of go under another Practice Act. If this were to move forward, I don't know how much support any legislation would have, but it's just something to consider, that, if we are digging our heels in for all of these things, that at some point, we're just going to be following what somebody else is doing rather than being a collaborator with it. So I think this is going to keep coming back. And since it is something that's done in other states, it does start to make it more difficult to say it's not a safe practice. So those were my thoughts.
That being said, the problem with the fact that they don't see, from what I could see, they don't see any need for regulation at following the chiropractic presentation. Is all about certification and nothing about standards being maintained and watched and who is responsible for that. They had no answer to that. They walked around that question. And the fact that their members are effectively working without any regulation, that means there's no protection to the consumer.
So this is again, that perception thing, because I didn't get that from that presentation. I thought when you were asking the questions to them, and I'm not like arguing for or against, but I thought when you were asking the questions of them, you were asking who regulates the practice. And I thought you were asking them for in their states. They kept going back to they defer to the each state and are behind whatever each state decides.
Right.
Which to me was, they were just saying we're an organization just like ACVIM or something like that, but the regulation is based on what each state determines,
Right. But
not
if-
that they shouldn't be regulated. That was my take on it.
No, I agree. But in fact, the indirect supervision, which I believe is what they all want, that when I asked specifically for those states with indirect supervision, who does the consumer have to, when they have a complaint, who do they go to?
Yeah, and I took that they weren't sure because it depended on the state. That was what I thought the answer was. And so like in Nevada, they would go to the Veterinary Medical Board, and in Ohio, they would go to the Chiropractic Board. But I don't know that they were saying nobody should be responsible.
I actually understood it the way you did, Dr. Maniak. I took it as, and I'm kind of in the middle waiting to hear, like you said, but I did take it the same way Dr. Maniak said, isn't that I felt, because I even wrote a note that it would be, my note says it'd be very confusing for the consumer as to where do they go? And that's what my note is very clear. It said, where does the consumer go? And how does the consumer know where to go to file a complaint if they have a concern? And so I wrote that note after your comment. So, because that's a very big concern for me. It's like, how does the consumer get taken care of?
But I think that's what ICVA was saying. It is not under the purview because as an organization, they feel responsible for like the certification, but then each state would have their own, I guess, decision of who has the regulatory authority over the practice.
Yeah, I think the big thing is that when we have these discussions, the answer to Dr. Maniak's question keeps coming up that we don't get complaints and but we need to know how to handle them. And so that's a question that needs to be answered because the consumer needs to know where to go. And so I think it needs to be clearly defined. And so regardless of the direction we go, we need to know, how is the consumer taken care of?
along those lines, I'm really concerned of the very blurred border between being a chiropractor and a physical therapist. And I was actually disturbed when I learned that the physical therapists are using shockwave, but the chiropractors aren't. But maybe I thought someone said they might start using shockwave, and that's a real concern about protection for the animals and the people who are around them, especially horses being ridden, they're getting shockwave, and especially if they're not, they don't have a veterinarian who's written a prescription or recommendation to have that performed on a horse with all the, you can't exercise this horse vigorously for 30 days, yada, yada, shouldn't be given over top of metallic implants, should not be used over the spinal cord. I just have a concern, both the chiropractors and the physical therapists don't quite know what they don't know. And that's where being a veterinarian comes in. And even the veterinarians don't often know, especially with a lot of the neurologic diseases. I think it's all a stiff neck, subluxation or something, and it could be any kind of parasite crawling through there, nutritional lack, neoplasms, anything. It needs to have a proper workup. They just don't all, just because they're dragging their toes and look sloppy, drunk doesn't mean it's a subluxated joint.
I think the conversation of why we invited the ICVA is to actually
ABC.
ABC is to have clarity of the qualification process of allowing non-veterinarians to perform the chiropractic services on animals, right? Because that is a very important thing for us to understand. What makes somebody from another like allied profession be able to practice on animals when we know specifically that animals, the way that we veterinarians study and understand, we have a very specific way of handling things. So I guess that's one of the objectives of the presentation, is trying to understand. And I think that is why we need to have continued conversation, not only about, I guess, regulation, but really identifying what is the scope of practice that we are going to, I guess, allow, if that is something that is put in legislation, and what would be the process for us.
But in the meantime, I mean, it seems like we could clarify it, but both chiropractors and physical therapists, is that in order to do that and charge and whatnot, you have to have a treatment plan from a veterinarian licensed in this state who's done a proper workup, and this is the veterinarian's recommendation as to what needs to be done and needs to be rechecked in 2 weeks or whatever. When I go for physical therapy after a total hip or whatnot, they recommend me to a physical therapist. She got the orders from the surgeon that did it, and it's a kind of a set routine. I don't see why that is a big problem. He never came up to the office to see me get physical therapy or anything else. He just, whether they followed up with each other, I don't know, but that's the bare minimum that we need to protect the animals.
Yeah, and just on that note, in order to be able to lay out those bare minimums and have some language that prevents some of these things from happening, we have to be at the table and talking about it. And that's where I think the challenge lies, is that we're concerned about the risks, but if we just say, no, this isn't something that we can look at or allow, then we're not at the table. We're not part of the language, and these things can just be put into the Physical Therapy Practice Act or into the Chiropractic Act, which we're just talking about the Chiropractic Act. I feel like the certification program that was presented is a lot more rigorous than some of, and maybe we just haven't seen the programs for the animal physical therapy. I would say my understanding is that some of these are just weekend courses for animal physical therapy versus this is a more rigorous program. And I appreciated the presentation. I thought that was really helpful, and perhaps we need to do the same thing for physical therapy. But I also think that the fact that we don't have any requirement for certification for people practicing on animals right now with direct supervision is a problem, and that's something we need to look at regardless of where this goes. I think that anybody that is practicing chiropractic manipulation on animals should have that certification. I think that that's should be a requirement, and is a concern that they're not. Like, people are just saying, oh, I'm a chiropractor, I'm coming in, and they have no training on animals, and I'm sure there's harm being done there as well. So anyway.
A quick comment and observation. One of the concerning comments that I recall from the presentation yesterday was the statement, there's no supervision in Utah because we don't want that liability. And that just struck me as, wow, that seems to be a concern.
I very much appreciated them coming and talking yesterday, because it does show why, like Dr. Bradbury said, the reason for certification and why we're saying it's so important. It demonstrates all of the things that they're taught, and why, again, we need to be at the table talking, because we want to protect consumers and be able to show consumers that the people that we want treating their pets have the education, background, and skill to be able to treat them, and that they are certified, they have the training, and they have the knowledge to be able to do so.
So at this point, members, I think what would be helpful for the executive committee, who has the delegated authority to have conversations with members of the legislature, as long as they are portraying the discussions that the board has had. Historically, when things like chiropractors or physical therapists have been discussed, the board has been flat opposed to it. It sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this board currently is open to the idea of allowing chiropractors to practice on animals outside of the direct supervision requirement. Is that, or no?
No.
No. Okay. So you want to keep, so you still do not want to change or open to the idea of changing the current requirements?
I want to keep it so that the chiropractor and the physical therapist does what is recommended by a veterinarian who's made a diagnosis, come up with a treatment plan.
But does the veterinarian have to be in the same building?
Not when the procedures are being done.
Okay, so I'm specific, I'm only talking about chiropractors right now. Physical therapy is next.
Right.
So currently, chiropractors can do MSM under the direct supervision of a veterinarian. And I heard the request to look at that further, to potentially add the certification requirement to do that. But also, when the executive committee meets with the legislative staff or members of the legislature, is the thought that beyond that, the position has not changed.
So the question, Dr. Grant, is the chiropractors want to be able to, for example, go out to a ranch with a referral from a veterinarian and practice on an animal without the veterinarian being present, but with a referral.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
Dr. Grant, I have a question for you then. If something goes wrong with what that chiropractor does, who does that fall on, and what is the regulating body that is responsible?
Well, if the uh, the chiropractor is a professional licensed chiropractor, then it should, that's part of having a license. If they do something that causes, has an untoward effect,
But I have a concern that we don't have, there isn't a veterinarian on the chiropractic board. And hence, that chiropractic board, I don't believe is qualified to regulate.
So what if
Wh-
we regulate it?
Yeah, so there's two different questions being asked to me. It's who has the authority to regulate whoever is doing this, and that would depend on the statutory framework. So if it's under, if they put it under the chiropractic board and they issue the certificate, the chiropractic board would have the authority. If there's a statutory framework that this board would issue the certifications, it would go to us. The other question though is would the consumer know? And that's, I think, the concern. But as far as the authority, that depends on how the statutes are set up.
So it sounds like the question of whether it's kept the same or the Kentucky model, where they have all the allied health professionals within the veterinary board,
Right,
Or the Nevada model?
right.
which increases the load on the board exponentially in California.
I guess it depends on how many are qualified. I think right now the estimates are there'd be roughly 50 that would be qualified in the chiropractic world in order to get that certification. But it all depends on the requirements that are put in. Okay.
well, I know at the end of the day, we have to be concerned about monies and financing and everything else like that, but it seems to me that basically we need to make sure it's done right, and if we are the ones that need to have control of it, we should take that upon ourselves, because it could, to me, properly run, it should decrease the number of problems if people knew that there was a rigorous overseeing, and something was going to be done if it was done incorrectly.
Okay, so then I think for the purposes for the executive committee, it sounds like the board is semi-split on the idea. Just to help with this, do you all want to take public comment specific to chiropractors practicing on animals before we go to physical therapists? You want to do both?
Really? Okay. I think it would be easier to hear for each side, but well, there's some people on the line for chiropractic and some people on the line for physical therapy. So I would think that it would be, but whatever.
Would you like me to keep going? You want to open it up? Okay.
Okay, so let us open the floor for public comment with regards to item 9D.
Can we do also 9A just because we didn't? do
Okay,
that?
9A and 9B. Anybody in the room? Anybody? No.
So for those who want to make public comment, this is specific to the board's sunset review process and the licensed chiropractors practicing on animals potential legislation. We are not taking public comment yet on physical therapists.
Hi, my name is Grant Miller. I'm the Regulatory Director at the California Veterinary Medical Association. And the CVMA has a long-standing history and will remain in strong opposition to any attempt by a human healthcare practitioner to increase their scope of practice to include animals. That includes chiropractic attempts. We know with a referral model, the ability for the veterinarian to keep eyes on that patient diminishes over time. And we also know that there are many, many conditions in animal patients that are a medical condition or a neurologic condition that may manifest as what one might perceive to be a chiropractic issue, but that over time emerges almost insidiously as something completely different. We've all seen that as licensed veterinarians. We can all name a number of examples where that could take place. And so we're concerned about the health, safety, welfare of these animals if a veterinarian is not continually involved in the oversight of somebody who has no formal training in all of the nuances of animal physiology. Yesterday, you heard me talk about the red flags and how could they possibly encompass all of the red flags in veterinary medicine in a certification course. And they said, well, what we do is we treat the animal once, and if it's getting better, we keep going. If it's not getting better, we refer it back. Well, there can be an animal that has multiple problems that does indeed get better from some chiropractic, but that doesn't eliminate the fact that there's an underlying problem. We've heard time and time again from veterinarians who work in this area about cases in which something was missed in the animal patient, something is emerging that is a serious issue. And so for this reason, we're opposed. We're also opposed because we know that these professions will not stop here. You heard in Kentucky about how now they want to use lasers. They want to
1 minute.
prescribe medications, nutraceuticals. It doesn't matter if it's nutraceutical over the counter. The second you prescribe it to a treatment plan, it's treated like an FDA drug. So now they want to prescribe. They're also talking about taking x-rays and reading radiographs. You think they can read a neck on a horse? So we also saw from Kentucky that when one comes, they all come. And if we open the door to this in California, we're going to have a massive shift in allowing people who don't have a formal standardized education in animals to work on animals. And that's unacceptable to us. If that is possible in people's mind, then why not create reciprocity and let veterinarians who take a weekend certification course work on human beings? So for these reasons and many more, we are strongly opposed. This will remain our number
15
one
seconds.
opposition issue. And we would encourage the board to also join us as you historically have in your opposition. Thank you.
Okay, moderator, could you please open for public comment online?
All right, we are open for public comment via WebEx. This is for items 9A and 9B, as in Alpha and Bravo. People will be given 3 minutes to speak, and I'll give you a 1 minute warning and a 15-second warning before your time expires. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users, dial *3 to raise your hand. And for our mobile device users, you may need to hit the ellipses button, that's the ... in order to find your hand. We're going to take just a few more seconds to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no additional requests for public comment, do you wish to continue?
Yes, please.
All right, members, now we are moving on to 9C, potential legislation related to licensed physical therapists practicing on animals. In your memo, we talk about the November 21st, 2024 meeting that was hosted by the Senate Committee on Business Professions Economic Development that Dr. Solicito and I attended. There is no legislation currently introduced, and then I did provide a link to the memo with written public comments regarding this, much like agenda item 8, requesting similar legislation mirroring Nevada's model to be put into California.
Just to comment on the meeting that occurred, I guess, listening in, what my biggest takeaway from that meeting is the fact that this has been an ongoing conversation, and currently there's nothing new that is being presented that would change things. I believe that there are like suggestions of looking into what other states are doing with regards to physical therapy, working on animals. And I think that's what this board is trying to do, is to get as much information as we can. But moving forward, I believe from that meeting, it just basically was status quo. There's really nothing much, that had changed, from where it has been for the past so many years. Any other comments from the board members? Okay, no. Any comments from the room? Okay, no comments from the room. Moderator, could you please open the online?
We are once again open for public comment online. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise your hand. We will call on people in the order we have requests. And it looks like our first request comes from Karen Atlas. Hold on just a moment. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to talk today. My name is Karen Atlas. I am the president of the Animal Physical Therapy Coalition, which is a coalition that represents veterinarians, physical therapists, registered vet techs, and the animal owning consumers. And we've been committed to increasing access to animal health care options through common sense legislative change. I did want to point out for the record that Agenda 9C's memo describing the stakeholder meeting needs some clarification. In the memo, it characterizes that the Senate BPED staff hosted a roundtable discussion regarding allowing physical therapists to practice on animals without veterinary supervision. Well, more accurately, and for the record, the Senate BPED staff called the stakeholder meeting with the intent of furthering discussions on a framework that balances animal patient safety with access to services physical therapists can provide animal patients in continued coordination and collaboration with licensed veterinarians. The true purpose was to ensure that the professional barriers are worked through so APTs can provide safe animal PT services to California residents. Now, with that said, as Agenda 9C memo indicates, the BPED stakeholder discussion did include PTs practicing without veterinary supervision. However, this was stated by Dr. Grant Miller of the California Veterinary Medical Associations. He's the Director of Regulatory Affairs, who raised the supervision issue and argued that the current definitions of supervision do not fit well in the context of the California Veterinary Practice Act. So during the meeting, he asked on behalf of the CVMA to use the term referral as the preferred nomenclature and to remove any language that discusses supervision, since the current understanding of supervision levels are not used in the type of practice context that he thinks it was constructed in, which was namely, it was created based on the context that a veterinarian owns the hospital.
1 minute.
We have hired employees. So Dr. Miller stated that using the current supervision language does not fit into the context, therefore it really shouldn't be used. Historically, our association has introduced 2 separate bills that mirrored Nevada, and that was AB 3013 in 2018 and AB 814 in 2023, both of which the board opposed, both of which mirrored Nevada. It is nice and ensuring that the board may be open to having some sort of regulations and legislation that would be common sense to allow qualified physical therapists to practice. And so for that, I am hopeful that this board will not continue to
15 seconds.
to oppose the common sense legislation that our coalition continues to put before the board. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And that was our only request for public comment at the moment.
Thank you. So now we continue with the next item, 9D.
All right. So this is potential legislation related to regulating pet crematories. As it states in our memo, I met with the staffers from Senate Committee on Business Professions and Economic Development in December regarding regulating pet crematories. DCA representatives from DCA and from the Bureau, Cemetery Funeral Bureau also attended the meeting. The primary concern is that consumers don't have any recourse if when they ask for their pets to be cremated and the remains are lost, what is the recourse for the consumers? Subsequently, Senator Stern's office did reach out and they provided some unbacked language that is linked in the memo and wanted to know the board's appetite for regulating pet crematories. I can't hear you.
Okay, any
Uh,
thoughts? Okay, Dr. Bradbury.
As I said, I'm not very hungry. I don't have a good appetite for it. No, in all seriousness, we don't have any background or training in funerary services, and I don't feel like there's any we have any place in regulating anything that happens after it leaves the veterinary premises. I do think there may be some things we can do to improve on our regulations when it comes to handling of remains while they are in our care. I think I talked to Jessica about this briefly, and the only, the times that I've seen issues is when remains have been mislabeled, or the labeling has fallen off, and so and I don't think there's anything in our regulations to protect the consumer from situations like that. These are human errors; they can happen, but I think we may have something to offer there, but we just don't know anything about it. I think there's a concern for the crematory services. Is it the board of, what is the name of the human? Yeah, the Cemetery and Funeral Bureau. So I think there was a concern about the amount of work that it would put on them, but I don't know if we've gotten any more information on how many pet crematoriums there are. There's also more than just crematoriums. There's like aquamation. There's a number of different services of preservation of the animals. There's burial, cemeteries. So I don't know how much that would add to their workload, but I can't imagine that it's much different in terms of, what they know all of like, they were the ones that were leading that discussion, if I remember correctly, in how these things, what the different terminology is, even like, how would we regulate this? So I don't think that we should be regulating the crematoriums.
So I agree. I believe that it should be, we need to make sure that I believe we need to put something into effect that the consumer is protected up until the time the pet leaves our facility. And so we have no recourse at this, or the consumer has no recourse, and we have no way to take action. So we need to make sure that we help by putting something into effect that we can protect the consumer, and however that we do that. So if that helps, but I agree that once the pet leaves our facility, yeah, then what? And I don't think that, and I don't think we want to put any more burden on the funeral business and the crematories.
Well, I mean, somebody needs to regulate it, right?
Right, but that's what I said. It's that's a different department, but they shouldn't.
be them.
Yes, but we regulate it up until the pet leaves the veterinary hospital, the veterinary facility.
And remember, some of you who were here at the time might remember when this came up several years ago, and we had a member of the public come and share her concern, which kind of started all this potential legislation discussion. And the concern was that she, in a nutshell, had a smaller dog and a larger dog, both who had passed away, and she had cremated, and the remains of the smaller dog weighed more than the remains of the larger dog. And there's been a lot of discussions on the crematory side of why that's not necessarily indication that anything went wrong, because there's a lot of other things that go into that, and it's not necessarily a cause for concern. One thing to keep in mind, if this board does feel it does need to be regulated, one of the concerns that was raised during this meeting was if it is regulated regardless on who does it. It will increase, it will be costly. It's costly to regulate any profession. And the concern could be that you have, you create this regulatory body, it it will be costly for them to do, but also those costs then would be put onto the consumer to pay for. And I think a concern would be that if consumers who already aren't able, a lot of them aren't able to afford veterinary services, if their animal does pass away and they have them cremated, the concern is that they won't be able to afford it, which could result in consumers either throwing the bodies in the garbage or burying them in their backyards. Both are concerns. So that's also something to keep in mind when you are saying, yes, we need to regulate this. It's going to be expensive, and I just wanted to put that on the table.
Okay, I withdraw that comment.
And it's very expensive already, the process to do cremation. It's already expensive to the client. So I'll put that out there already. I mean,
As a consumer, 2 years ago, we had to euthanize one of our cats, and we selected cremation services. At the time, we were not provided an option between a private or group cremation, which, didn't raise any flags for me. I'm not really too concerned about that. I mean, I think the circumstances at the time, I wasn't worried about it. But last week, we had to put another cat down. And this time, I did some research online for euthanasia and cremation services, as well as when we took our cat in to his normal veterinarian, there was a new option for private or group cremation, and there were different costs associated with each. So I don't know what has promulgated that change. It may just be the industry itself is making changes to respond to consumer concerns. But that's a recent development in these types of issues that may be coming from, I don't know if they're coming from an agency or just the industry itself.
So it might be helpful for Mr. Espinoza to know a little bit more about what does happen. Tara, that's always been an option. The group versus private, and a group cremation typically is not an actual cremation. It's kind of where the everything is put into one large container, and it's, for lack of a better word, digestion. It's not, rendering. So it's a rendering facility. That's the group versus a private cremation where you would have the option of having the cremains returned to you. So it's all, and since I've been a veterinary assistant, that's always been an option. And so, that's another thing to think about for what we're looking at, for what we can do within the veterinary practice is, are these options being given to everybody if they're using these facilities? But if somebody cannot afford a private cremation, the group cremation is a very inexpensive way of for group. So what if somebody can't afford that?
There's always the option of dropping off at the local shelters, municipal shelters. They usually provide free services for disposal of remains.
But anyway, usually when an animal has passed away at a hospital or is euthanized, some decision has to be made by a client. Now, in the equine world, that's a much bigger issue, right? So what do they do with the horses?
Well, most of the horses in Southern California are rendered. I'm not sure about the rest of the state, but I think there's probably rendering plants available. But it seems to me we need to be taking a better look at this because the potential of spreading disease by improper cremation or disposal of bodies is a real factor. And that's why I've always determined that you were not supposed to bury animals in the state of California. And, a number of other states like Montana, the animals are often, horses, whatnot, are put to sleep by shooting them rather than giving them pentobarbital solutions because they can't dig a hole in the winter when it's 40 below. So the carcasses are out there and protected birds are out there and they eat on them and they die from the barbiturates. And what happens when a dog dies of some unknown clostridial infection or salmonella and it's improperly handled and it's a mixed thing and the remains go to some household, maybe it's spread with 5 or 6 different cats I've seen or dogs on the same thing. And one of them died of, a severe clostridial or infection. Is that going to spread around all these other different urns? I'm not sure. I think it's a problem that we need to take a better look at, what the potentials are.
So do we go back to the short answer or the long answer?
That's up to you. I did hear the recommendation of looking at our current standards to see if there's room to improve consumer protection in the standards up until the remains leave the facilities, the premises. So we can do that as well if that's the prerogative of the board.
And that is, I want to be, because that is what was my recommendation. And for logistics, the financially and fiscally, because the other, like making any type of regulations for the funeral side is, I want to make sure I'm not being fiscally sound for people, for everyone.
So, okay, but it sounds like for the recommendation was to look at our current regulations, which doesn't touch after the remains leave the premises. So that wouldn't be part of it. But we can do that. And that would be separate from these discussions. It's just the acknowledgement of we should take a look at it. Go public comment.
Okay, now we open it for public comment. Somebody in the room?
Hi, Grant Miller, California Veterinary Medical Association. Just one point of technical comment. You had mentioned, Jessica, that the language that Senator Stern's office had presented was in the packet. Do all of you have that?
It's linked in the memo.
Can you double check that? Because I'm not finding it, which could just be my left-handedness, but
I just did.
so on the VMB website under item 9.
Under agenda item 9D,
Uh-huh.
the last paragraph has a hyperlink to the unbacked language that was provided.
Okay, well, I'll take another look and see if I can find it. We have not seen the language yet and we have no position, but early conversations in our organization do not indicate that we'd be against this, but we'd be against it being regulated by this board. Pet cremation is not the practice of veterinary medicine. This board is responsible for what is the practice of veterinary medicine. There are several allied industries that spin off of a veterinary practice, such as regulated waste, such as controlled drug disposal. There are many, many other parts to this, and this is just one of them. And so I'm sorry that the Cemetery and Funeral Bureau is balking at the work that they have to do, but that's the breaks. That's the way life goes. So we will definitely be watching this very carefully and be very concerned if the onus of responsibility is intended to be placed on this board. That is going to be very expensive, very difficult lift for this board. We're concerned, obviously, about our licensing dollars and how those are spent, and would very much like to see this in the proper hands of the bureau that has the expertise for it and the vested responsibility, which by our approximation is the Cemetery and Funeral Bureau.
1
So
minute.
again, we'll take a look at the language, but our concerns preliminarily are that they're trying to couch it with this board. Also, on the horse side, just to help you understand a little bit more what's transpired with horses, we actually have a state law in California in our Food and Ag Code that requires us to mark the horses that have a barbiturate in their system. And those horses are actually, if they are rendered, they're not rendered for animal consumption. So if they're, we believe that they are incinerated. That's what we're more or less told by the two companies that offer the horse disposal services in California. The companies are not very forthcoming about what they're doing because there's trade secrets that
15
they
seconds.
just don't want to talk about. But we have to make sure that if a horse has a barbiturate in its system, we put this letter B that's 4 inches high in orange ink on its head, and then that's the
Time.
company's signal to know that that horse cannot go into the rendering stream. They go to a separate part of the transfer station or to the plant, and then they go off to wherever it is they go, and that's how they're disposed of. We do also have cremation options for horses in California through those two same companies, but it's very costly. Thank you.
Okay, moderator, could you please open the public comment online?
We are open for public comment via WebEx. If you'd like to make a comment on 9D as in Delta, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise your hand. We will call on people in the order we have requests. As a reminder to our mobile device users, you may need to hit the ellipses button, that's the ... in order to find your hand. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request online for public comment. Seeing no request online, do you wish to continue with the agenda?
Yes, please, thank you.
Members, I would like to clarify the representative from Cemetery Funeral Bureau did not balk at the potential for additional work. They were very open and receptive to the discussion, and they wanted to assist in any way possible. They did raise a concern of we didn't know how many currently are existing, and if it went to the Bureau of Cemetery Funeral, it's her and I think 2 other staff. So there's a concern, but overall it was where if it is regulated, wherever it goes is going to be very costly in order to do it. But they in no means were balking at any idea of this.
Okay, so any other comments from the board members? Okay, I see no hands. Okay, so let us continue with item 19, which is the update and discussion on pending regulations. Justin, there you go.
Hello, board members. Justin Sotelo, Policy Specialist for the board. Just providing you with the quarterly update on pending regulations. I think we have the memo pulled up here. The memo indicates that we currently have 7 rulemaking packages that are pending in the various stages of the initial and final phases of the rulemaking process, 3 of which are Section 100 rulemaking packages. The first item listed on page 1 of the memo is our drug compounding package. This proposed text was, or the final text was reapproved by the board in April of last year. Prior to that, it had gone through some revisions. This package is currently being worked on by staff in the initial phase of the rulemaking process. And the plan is to get that noticed with the Office of Administrative Law this year. So it'll be on our calendar for this calendar year. There's a summary of the proposed changes at the bottom of page 1. But in short, the proposal makes technical revisions or corrections to the drug compounding regulations, adds or clarifies definitions, clarifies documentation and labeling requirements, or establishes other labeling requirements. So that's the first item. The next item on page 2 at the top is our minimum standards for alternate veterinary premises package. As you might recall, this package is associated with the next package listed there, the Title 24 package. I might just kind of skip the order here and give the update on the Title 24. It was, this package or parts of it were originally part of the alternate veterinary premises package until it was determined that that anything building standards related in our regulations needed to be moved over to Title 24, California Building Code, and that there's a separate process for that. The regulations go through the California Building Standards Commission. So we did initiate that process this year, and happy to say that the proposal has been approved by the Building Standards Commission. I'll just kind of go through the update since the last meeting. The 45-day comment period for this proposal concluded on October 7th. There were no public comments received. As a result, staff proceeded with the rulemaking package. It was reviewed and approved by DCA. On November 5th, the package was approved by the DCA director. Final documents were submitted to the Building Standards Commission for its consideration at its December meeting. Executive Officer Jessica Sieferman presented the proposal to the commission, and it was approved that day. Last Friday, the 10th, the approved rulemaking was filed with the Office of the Secretary of State. The commission is now working with the International Code Council to publish all approved code changes into the 2025 California Building Code. And as we've mentioned before, they have a triennial code adoption cycle. So these changes are slated to take effect January 1 of next year. So the associated package is, again, the one listed at the top of page 2. So the goal is to have both of these take effect January 1. So we're currently working on that. It's in our calendar to get that noticed with the Office of Administrative Law this year and get through the approval process so that that one can also hit the books on January 1 of next year. Okay, I'm going to move down to the records proposal at the bottom of page 2. So in July of last year, this proposal was approved by the board with corresponding legislative amendments to amend sections 4826.6 and 4855. It's anticipated that those amendments would be enacted again January 1. So we're working to get this package through the approval process as well, so that it would also hit the books January 1 of 2026. Okay. And then moving on to page 3. So starting on page 3, we have 3 Section 100 rulemaking packages listed there. They were all submitted to OAL on December 27th, so they're all on the same track. OAL has 30 working days to review the packages and either disapprove or approve, hopefully approve. But they're listed there. The first one has to do with eliminating any California examination provisions from our act. The second one at the bottom of page 3 is just a very kind of well, it's updating our address in the regulations, and it's also addressing the name change to our committee, which is now the Wellness Evaluation Committee. So that's what that second one pertains to. And then the last one listed on page 4 has to do with, it was originally, we called it the RVT Vaccine Administration Proposal, but since the enactment of SB 669 and AB 1399, we reevaluated that proposal, and it was determined that since the VCR provisions moved over to statute, that we could repeal 2032.1, and then just update some references to the statute under 2032.25 and 2038.5. So this one essentially became a Section 100 proposal as well, so just another cleanup item. There's a summary down or in the middle of the page of what the original proposal intended to do. But again, because of the two bills listed, this one became a Section 100 proposal. And again, all three of those are on the same track, submitted to OAL on December 27th. So hopefully we'll be receiving word on those here soon. And then the last page in the memo is just the tracker sheet that we always provide as an attachment. Anything in red would be updates since our last meeting, October. So that is my update, and happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you. Anyone has questions for Justin? Comments? Yeah. Yes, no. All right, thank you so
Okay.
much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
We have to open it up for public comment. No public comment from the room, so we would like to open up for the participants online. Moderator?
We are once again open for public comment. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to continue?
Yes, please. All right, so I guess we will be breaking for lunch and we will resume on to 1 o'clock. All right, thank you.
Welcome, Anna. If you're available for a quick mic check, would you please unmute?
Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Perfect.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Now we will reconvene open session, starting with the student liaison reports. Now, our University of California Davis liaison, Holly Masterson, is not unavailable, but her report has been provided as a link, with the agenda items. And so we will now proceed with Anna Stiles' report. Hi, Anna, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. 1 second here, let me just get set up. Okay. Excuse me. In the interest of time, just because I know there's been lots to do at this meeting, I just wanted to kind of give the board a few updates. So in previous meetings, I had mentioned when I think it was Dr. Marshall came and spoke in front of the board from the CDFA. We talked about kind of giving more visibility to the veterinary medicine loan repayment plan via the USDA. And so our student chapter of the American Association of Bovine Practitioners coordinated with the CDFA. And so doctors Marissa Silva and Katie Murray, I think actually just earlier this week, came and spoke to students. It was advertised to all years, and even I think some alumni, excuse me, alumni classes as well. I don't have numbers as like how many came to the event, but anecdotally, I hear it went well. So they talked about the veterinary medicine loan repayment plan and how you qualify, and what ways that can help students. So that was good. And also I have mentioned there's a study going on. There were surveys sent out looking at factors for food animal careers, and the final results are still kind of being analyzed, as you can imagine, since there's a lot of like survey and free response. But I got to look at the kind of like preliminary conference poster material, and they actually compared Western U and UC Davis with Kansas State University, and they essentially said like the survey population was mostly female, representation across all 4 years, and there's a diverse animal experience, and also like rural versus urban backgrounds. As you can maybe imagine, the Kansas State survey population, those students had more or came from a more rural background, just percentage wise, and again of the survey population, I forget the exact numbers, but kind of other than that, the results seem to be kind of similar for the 3 schools. But they did say for the question, like considering a career as a food animal veterinarian after graduation, Kansas State was roughly half and half, yes and no. Davis was about like essentially 1/3 to 2/3, so 1/3 yes, 2/3 no. And Western University was about 1/4 yes and 3/4 no. So hopefully I can kind of keep up with the point person I've been in touch with about that study, because it'll be interesting to see what they see about the different factors. They talked about job opportunities, salaries, motivation, stuff like that. So they're still working through all that, but there are these preliminary numbers in case they're of interest to you. We did have 2 of our second-year students. They were 2 of the 5 recipients of the 2024 Compassionate Care Scholarships that are given through like the Humane Society. So they were 2 members of the class of 2026, and the scholarship is again, it's awarded by the Humane Society Veterinary Medical Alliance, and they're awarded to veterinary students and technician students who demonstrate an extraordinary commitment to animal welfare, which is something that I get a good feel for here at Western U. I mean, I definitely appreciate it. I've spoken about the Street Dog Coalition event that both our Humane Society student chapter organization as well as our Association of Shelter Veterinarians student chapter, they put on this event for people experiencing or at risk of experiencing homelessness and their pets. It's usually, we had one this fall, and this time was really fun to be a part of and fun to see because we had obviously at Western University of Health Sciences, we have several different colleges with different health professions, and we partake in interprofessional education. And so at this event, in the past, we have had, or they've provided like human kind of like health and hygiene kits for the human owners of the pets that we see. But this time we actually had, I believe the DO students from the comp program through their club. They have a Pomona Homeless Outreach Project organization, and they provided flu vaccines and simple like health screenings, even just simple as like taking blood pressure. These are people that don't really have access to any of these things. So it was very heartwarming for me to see that, not only just giving them resources, but also like being able to perform things that we take for granted, like taking our blood pressure or getting a flu vaccine. We were able to provide that while also providing care for their dogs and cats. And then really quickly, I just thought it might be interesting that so far for the upcoming class of 2029, there have been more than 7,000 completed applications, which is on par for the class of 2028 and ahead of the pace for my class of 2027. So interviews are still going on. There are a lot to go through, but over 7,000 applicants is a lot. And then finally, again, just kind of in the interest of time, obviously the the wildfires that are happening right now are kind of at the forefront of students' minds right now. Classes started for first and second years. Third and fourth year students obviously are doing clinical courses and rotations. So with our distributive model, they are they're largely off campus. But the first 2 years, our classes started last week on January 6th. And as you may know, several different wildfires started to spread really quickly on January 7th. And while the area immediately around campus is not under evacuation warning, many students' residences were in evacuation zones. Again, I don't have numbers. I didn't go around asking people because obviously everyone's still kind of in, survival mode, for lack of a better term. But as you may recall, we have a problem-based learning curriculum, and so 3 days a week we meet in groups of 8 students, and a couple of the students in my own PBL group are either in evacuation warning zones and dealing with like respiratory chronic health issues, and some have actually like been evacuated, and I know a few people who have been, and so it is kind of it's kind of overshadowed. Sorry, excuse me. It's kind of overshadowed everything that people were kind of excited to come back to after the winter break. I'm lucky I have not needed to evacuate. The worst I've experienced so far is like poor air quality. But a long time ago, I was actually like displaced due to a fire, and while it was certainly not as devastating as these current wildfires, I can attest to the psychological toll that displacement takes on an individual, let alone a student, let alone a veterinary student. And these wildfires are affecting every student, faculty, and staff member at Western U. And we, I'm here to update the board on, what is going on at Western U College of Veterinary Medicine. So I wanted to highlight how our community, and again, a lot through like student involvement with our student organizations, how a lot of us in responding or kind of even just reacting to these natural disasters, um, a large, a large part of our response and coping with, even just the kind of indirect or seemingly far away, um, threat of the fires, and their effects. A lot of our response to coping with all that has been to help others. Very quickly, after fire started to spread and evacuation started to happen, our association, our student chapter of the Association of Shelter Veterinarians, they immediately put out a like form to organize like emergency fosters if people were evacuated and they couldn't take their animals. We've had students going to the Pasadena Community Job Center, and helping out like sorting donations there. And we've had students also looking into, last time I checked with them, they were organizing how to help in the coming weeks in terms of both like the Pasadena Humane Society and other shelters in the area for small animals, and then also large animals. Some people were talking about just going and cleaning out stalls and feeding horses. But there's a common theme of wanting to, not necessarily, doesn't even have to be medical help, but just helping some way with both the animals and their human friends, so to speak, with coping with displacement and everything. So I commend our students for you know taking the stress and the the trauma of evacuations and having wildfires that can change so quickly so nearby. I commend our students for taking that and really trying to help out the community. And I think a lot of our students, with even previous events and organizations that I've mentioned before, we value compassionate care and like helping our community. So I also kind of want to reach out to see if any members of the veterinary community, in Southern California, have ideas, have needs that that our students could help with and volunteer with. Obviously, we're still in classes. We still have to prioritize our education, and we're currently on the nervous system, so it's not a walk in the park. But at the same time, a common theme is that helping others and helping animals in our community helps us cope with these stressors. And so, we're actively looking for ways to come together and help. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. And as a resident of the larger Los Angeles area as well, I totally would like to thank the Western U community for stepping up. You know, we're all part of this and we will get through this together. Now, with regards to your question about how the students could help, I know personally that a lot of your other municipal shelters and the private shelters in the area are in need of fosters because they're already have a high population on their hands before the fire, and now people that are having difficulty getting what you call this, like places for them to stay in, and their pets are not being allowed, and now they are being forced to bring their pets to the shelters. And so I think that is something we've always found students to be great fosters, you know, and so maybe that's something that you could probably reach out to your local mostly municipal shelters are the most in need of this service. And also speaking about the shelters, you were talking about the loan repayment, you know, program earlier. I really hope that the students of Western U are very much aware of the loan forgiveness, you know, program for vets that work in government, in animal shelters. You know, it really like is a really good program. And right now, both LA City and LA County animal services, animal control are in very much in need of veterinarians. So if you could help spread the word, you know, that opportunity is always there. Okay, thank you so much for your report. Now, from the other board members, any comments? Dr. Manning? No? Okay, well, thank you so much, Anna, and you stay safe out there, okay?
Thank you.
Now we will go to public comment. Any public comment from the room? Okay, no, and so moderator, can we please open it up for online comments?
If you would like to make a comment, now is the time to raise your hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users, dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to continue with the agenda?
Yes, please, thank you. Okay, I guess the next item is the president's report. So I didn't realize that. Okay. Well, there's really not much that I could report because this is my first meeting and I'm hoping that I am not confusing people with how things are going. And but actually for this president's report, I already mentioned earlier that the participation I had with the meeting with the board. Yeah. For the physical therapist. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't want to rehash the same thing. So that was one of the things that I've attended, and we've also started our weekly executive team meeting, which involves our EO, Jessica, and Christy as vice president. But other than that, there's really nothing much that has happened. So I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge and give thanks to our past president, Dr. Bradbury. And I have been saying this to her. The dynamism that she brought during her presidency is just something that I would like to emulate. And I would like to thank her for always being fearless in opening up conversations where I would say probably a lot of people wouldn't hesitate to do so. And for that, you have given this board a really good foundation for us to continue completing our mission of protecting the consumers, but also elevating the practice of Veterinary Medicine. And for that, I'm very, very grateful. So thank you. All right, and that completes my report. Then I would turn it over to Christy. Oh, I would have to do public comment. Sorry. And I was doing so well. Okay. Can I now open the floor for public comment in the room? Okay, no public comment from the room. So let us open it up online, please, moderator.
We are open for public comment via WebEx on the President's Report. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise a hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to continue with the agenda?
Yes, please. So now we can move on to the next agenda item, which is the Registered Veterinary Technician Report by Christy Pawlowski.
Yeah, which I have nothing to report either because there is nothing at this time. So welcome that public comment.
Okay, now we open it up for public comment. Nothing from the room, and so we will open it up online.
All right, agenda item 22. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button. Dial-in users dial *3. And as a reminder to our mobile device users, you may need to hit the ellipses button, that's the ... in order to find your hand. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request, do you wish to continue with the agenda?
Yes, please.
All right, members, the next item is agenda item 23, update discussion possible action regarding American Association of Veterinary State Board activities. The first one is a call for bylaws amendments. We initially weren't planning on proposing any bylaw amendments, but we recently it was brought to our attention about the bylaws section 6F, where if you have a partial term and that partial term is over a year, then they are not eligible to serve a second full term. And we had the scenario where Dr. Nunez, as you know, served a partial term when there was a vacancy. We nominated him. He had to run, was elected and appointed to serve a partial term. The partial term, first of all, no one controls, as far as none of the member boards control the terms. It's the elections are held at the annual conference, which is dependent on, there's a lot of factors depending on it. It is typically each year, but not necessarily exactly on the 365th day. It really depends on when the conference is held for contracts. And so it could be less than a year, it could be more than a year, but it's not going to be significantly more than a year. With Dr. Nunez's appointment, I think he had served a year and 10 days. And because of that, because of the section in the bylaws, he now is not eligible to serve a full 2-year term. And so he would not be able to run. The directors at large position is only 2 years overall, which I think everybody would agree that's an incredibly short term in order to make any kind of meaningful impact. I think I've heard from a lot of board members that even within the first year, you're trying to kind of get your head around things that are happening. And by the second year, you're making more progress and understanding what's happening. So the 2 years itself is very small, but then to cut that in half, it is really, I think, unfortunate. I think it potentially could serve as a disincentive for someone to want to fill that partial slot, because then they wouldn't be able to serve a full term later. And so what the proposal before you is to make it more similar to how in California it's written, where you can serve up to 2 full terms. So if you have, in California it's 4 years, but if you were to serve any kind of partial term, then you would serve that partial term, but then still be eligible to serve 2 full 4-year terms. So this is making the minor changes to D and E, adding the term partial to the treasurer for D. Directors at large, I'm striking out the term unexpired just because it's odd how that's termed. So we just changed to partial and then added full for, so it would read no more than 2 full consecutive terms. And then an F in that sentence that we're proposing to change is the second sentence reads, any person appointed or elected to fill, and we're striking an unexpired and changing it to a partial term. Proposed striking of less than 1 year and just have it say a partial term for treasurer director at large may be eligible for election to the same position for 2 additional consecutive terms after completion. And then we're proposing it say of the partial term. This would allow them to serve up to 2 full terms. And yes, if they have a partial term, regardless if it was less than 1 year or over 1 year, they would still be able to serve the 2 full year terms. So I'll open up for discussion or potential motion because we would have to propose this if the board was in agreement.
Okay, any comments? Any?
All right, you're taking too long. I'll make a motion to submit the proposed amendments to the AABSB.
And I will second.
Public comment.
Okay, so now we open it up for public comment. No public comment from the room. Moderator, can we please open it up for online participants?
We are open for public comment via WebEx. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to continue?
Yes, please.
Ms. Pulaski?
Yes.
Dr. Bradbury?
Yes.
Mr. Espinoza?
Yes.
Dr. Grant?
Yes.
Dr. Maniak?
Yes.
Dr. Solocito?
Yes.
Motion carries. The next item, members, is for the call of nominations. And there's a link to the information. We have to submit nominations by May 22nd, 2025. That does not mean that if there's other nominations, after that date, it doesn't mean that you can't make them because you can always make nominations on the floor. But in order for us to have our nominations be sent to all the member boards and included in the packets, we have to put them through, we have to submit them prior to May. Yes, so if you would like to make any nominations to those positions, now would be the time to do so.
I'd like to nominate Dr. Mark Nunez to the president-elect.
And I second.
No, you should probably do public comment for that one, and then we'll do next one.
Okay, so we would like to open the floor for public comment for the nomination. We do have a public comment from the room.
Hi, Grant Miller, Regulatory Director at the California Veterinary Medical Association. Not that it's any of our business, but we have been very impressed with Dr. Nunez's longstanding involvement and his knowledge about the topics at hand, and feel that it's a good idea to nominate him for president-elect. We can't really support it because nobody cares, but if we could, we would. Thank you.
Okay, moderator, could you please open up for public comment online?
We are open for public comment via WebEx on the nomination. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise your hand. And as a reminder to our mobile device users, you may need to hit the ellipses button, that's the ... in order to find your hand button. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to continue with the motion?
Yes, please.
Ms. Pulowski,
Yes.
Dr. Bradbury,
Yes.
Mr. Espinoza, Dr. Grant,
Yes.
Dr. Maniak,
Yes.
Dr. Solacito,
Yes.
motion carries.
I would like to nominate Dr. Christina Bradbury for a director position on the AAVSB.
I second the motion. Now we would like to open up for public comment with regards to the nomination of Dr. Bradbury for director. Anybody from the room?
Yeah, I would be honored to represent this
Oh.
board.
We did not.
Grant Miller, CVMA, great idea.
Now we would like to open up for public comment for participants online.
We are open for public comment on the next nomination. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users, dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to continue with the nomination?
Yes, please.
Ms. Pulowski,
Yes.
Dr. Bradbury,
Yes.
Mr. Espinoza,
Yes.
Dr. Grant,
Yes.
Dr. Maniak,
Yes.
Dr. Solacito,
Yes.
motion carries.
So is anybody else willing and able to be on any of these other committees? Because it would be great. The nominating committee, I'm going to be stepping down from that. I was actually appointed to that. Dr. Solacito, would you be interested in, it's like a 1 hour every few, it's a small commitment. Or Christy Pulowski. We also need an ICVA representative. So Dr. Maniak?
I know nothing about these positions, so.
Neither do we. No, I know about the AAVSB, but I mean, these are things that you would learn online. It just gets you involved in the national conversation. The ICVA is, Jessica could probably describe that better, but
So the ICVA, that's the organization that develops the NAVLE. And so on the NAVLE board, AAVSB has 4 representatives appointed from the AAVSB that's on the ICVA board. That's what that would be.
Interesting. Yeah.
Did you see how ready I was to nominate?
yeah, would you be interested in that? Okay, I'd like to nominate Dr. Maniak for the ICVA representative.
I second.
Okay, now we open the floor for public comment with regards to the nomination of Dr. Maniak for ICVA representative. No comments from the floor in the room. We would like to open up for public comment with regards to the nomination for participants online.
We are open for comments on the nomination via WebEx. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users, dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to
Yes, please.
continue?
Ms. Pulowski,
Yes.
Dr. Bradbury,
Yes.
Mr. Espinoza,
Yes.
Dr. Grant,
Yes.
Dr. Maniak,
Yes.
Dr. Solacito,
Yes.
motion carries.
Can I nominate Dr. Solacito for the nominating committee? We
Oh.
need a second.
I would like to nominate Dr. Solicito for the AAVSB nominating committee.
Oh, okay, I'll second it then.
Wait. I had your motion first, so you're seconding.
Okay, then I'll second it.
Okay.
I did.
All right, we would like to open the floor for public comment with regards to the nomination. None.
You know, we were all thinking about this and we just couldn't think of a better person for this. It's who we would have nominated.
Okay, now we would like to open up for public comment for participants online, please.
We are once again open for public comment via WebEx. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request, do you wish to continue?
Yes, please.
Ms. Bilowski,
Yes.
Dr. Bradbury,
Yes.
Mr. Espinoza,
Yes.
Dr. Grant,
Yes.
Dr. Maniac,
Yes.
Dr. Solicito,
Yes.
motion carries.
All right, now we move on to, agenda number 24 for executive management reports. Who's gonna be-
Hello, I have the admin report for you all, so I'll go ahead and give that update. So in January of this year, we hired Philip Wilcom to fill one of the board's special investigator positions. Mr. Wilcom's coming to the board from the Department of Industrial Relations, where he served as a deputy labor commissioner and performed duties similar to the SI, special investigators, such as collecting evidence, conducting interviews with witnesses. We're excited to see him, help us establish the position and figure out how everything is going to go from there. So it's exciting for us. We also hired Daniel Sanders to fill our vacant enforcement office technician position. Prior to his appointment with the board, he was a crew trainer in the service industry, where his responsibilities were managing and training crew staff. He was also responsible for reviewing, investigating, documenting, and resolving complaints brought to the company. So that should translate nicely to his role with the board. Not mentioned in the update, we're also filled the vacant inspection office technician position on Patty's team, and they will be starting with the board next week as well. So we currently still do have one vacant office technician position and one vacant associate governmental program analyst position. And the org chart is attached there with those positions and updates for your reference.
And Matt, just for that AGPA position, is that the one that we're looking at reclassifying into a special investigator position?
Yeah, that's correct. So we're not necessarily intending on filling it this time. We're evaluating whether we'd be better served to reclassify it into the special investigator position, which is currently now a blanket position. So that would take it out of the blanket.
And the thought would be if we have a special investigator position, they would be based out of Southern California. So, because a lot of our cases are in Southern California, and that way we wouldn't have to pay for the travel for our special investigator up here to fly down to Southern California and do all of that work down there.
Thank you, Jessica. Then for staff training, and this kind of relates back to the strategic plan. In November, all available board staff attended an in-person training and team meeting. The training was presented by DCA's SOLID team and focused on de-escalation tactics. Then in December, all available staff attended a virtual training, again presented by SOLID, focused on customer service skills. We also work with SOLID management and have scheduled out quarterly trainings for all staff throughout 2025, which are those topics that the board had in the strategic plan. So looking forward to working with SOLID this year. The wellness program update. So the Wellness Evaluation Committee, or WEC, typically meets every January, June, and October. The program recently transitioned to a new provider, so there's no meeting in January 2025 to allow a smooth transition between the vendors. There's currently one participant in the program, and the WEC should meet next in June 2025. The last part of the admin report was the budget report, which we heard on Wednesday from the budget's office. So those attachments are still on this report along with the org chart for your consideration and review. And then I don't know if we want to just go to the next one or, yeah.
I was just wondering who the new provider is for the wellness.
The provider's Premier Health Group. Yeah, I think they're a California-based group. So we've met with them a few times and just kind of getting everything up and running, like done some, nice to meet you, meet and greet kind of thing. And I'm encouraged. I felt like it was a really productive meeting, the first meet and greet meeting with them. So just looking forward to working with them and figuring out how we can both support each other as we transition into their program.
Would members like to open it up to public comment for each item, or would you like to have us continue and then do public comment at the end?
We'll just do all of the reports and then we'll open it up for public comment.
Okay.
Very good. Next, we have the licensing and examination report, which I'll also be presenting for you. First, we have some updates from the International Council for Veterinary Assessment. They had a call for nominations in October of 2024 for their Academic Veterinary Assessment Committee. The nominations closed on December 6, 2024. We still provided that update for you. And then they also announced holiday closures for the holiday season in 2024 and 2025. Moving on to the American Association of Veterinary State Boards, as we just discussed, the AVSB had a call for nominations announced in December of 2024. We just kind of went through all the positions there too. So, and I guess I learned too from Jessica that the nominations can go past May 22nd, 2025 because they can be made on the floor, but the announcement listed May 22nd, 2025 as the deadline to submit the nomination application. So on to the board's licensing updates. We have compared board stats through Q2 of fiscal year 23-24 to through Q2 of this fiscal year. In applications received overall, there's a slight decrease, and we have the breakdown for each license type below. Same with license registration and permits issued. We compared through Q2 of last fiscal year to through Q2 of this fiscal year, and we saw an increase in issued permits, licenses and registrations, and also have the breakdown below. And then lastly, we had the applications pending, which compared the same 2 quarters, and we saw a decrease in applications pending. The licensing population we reported on as well, and there's an increase in licensing population. And then as far as the Service Members Civil Relief Act, we have received 5 applications to date and recognized 1 out-of-state veterinarian and 1 out-of-state registered veterinary technician so far. Then we have the licensing statistics included for you, and you'll notice that the fiscal year 24-25 numbers are through Q2, so that's why they might look a little bit low. And we have a link to the application processing times as well.
Members, I wanted to add that in light of the wildfires in Southern California, I did reach out to both ICVA and AAVSB. ICVA, as a reminder, they're the administrators of the NAVLE. AAVSB administers the VTNE to see if there's any impacted testing centers in Southern California. It would impact RVT applicants sooner because the next exam window is next month in February. And then for the NAVLE, the active exam window opens in April. The VTNE reached out to their vendor PSI. There's been no closures reported at this time, but they said that if they are impacted, if candidates are impacted, PSI would reach out to those candidates to reschedule them. And I wanted to make sure that it was within the same exam window, and they said it would be. They said that if they weren't able to get to a testing center, if it was over a 2-hour drive, they would look at potentially offering a remote proctored exam for those candidates if they're impacted, or if there's a large population of them, they would look at having a mobile unit go out and help with the administration of the exam. So there's definitely options. And they appreciated the outreach because they had not thought of those things because they don't deal with a lot of wildfires. But so they're working on that now. If that happens, they will be prepared. And then with ICVA, they had no impact as of yet. And again, it's not until April, but they will let us know if there are any potential impacts.
Thank you. Next, we have enforcement, if there's no questions about licensing at this time.
Good afternoon. I'm Patty Rodriguez, Enforcement Program Manager, and I'll get us started with the inspections portion of the report.
You're super quiet.
Oh, am I okay? I feel really loud. Is that better? Okay. I'll get us started with the inspection portion of the report. And as part of the board's continued outreach efforts, a webinar was held a few months ago in November. This webinar featured a presentation by the DEA on their regulations and record-keeping requirements. So this webinar was very well received. We had 400 attendees, and the next one is scheduled for later this month. And that one will feature representatives from the FDA and their Center for Veterinary Medicine. So actually one of their legal counsel will be presenting, as well as a supervising investigator from the Board of Pharmacy, Christina Costa. She's a pharmacist, so she will also be presenting along with Dr. Jim Howard. And we have future webinars that we will schedule, probably feature DOJ folks to discuss cures, and possibly Radiologic Health Branch to discuss, their issues. The mobile inspection application went live in November, and so the inspectors have started using their iPads and the application as they conduct the inspections. And we've transitioned to maintenance and operations of the application. And so as we feel like improvements need to be made, we'll be working on making those improvements. And so those will become, as we use it, we'll see what those improvements are that are needed. And starting next month, we will be holding quarterly roundtable meetings for our inspectors, as we do for the subject matter experts. So that's going to be really helpful, because we have not had like a training or anything like that, in-person training for our inspectors for several years. So they're looking forward to these quarterly meetings to discuss updates and any issues that come up in the field. So that's it for inspections. I'll turn it over to Roy.
Ashley will handle intake.
Okay, sorry.
Wait, can I just ask a question about that, or should we just wait? Oh, I just wanted to know how you said, I'm sorry, you said that the application went live and we're going to make improvements as needed, but how does it seem to be working?
There are a few little quirks, as there always is with, technology, but nothing that we haven't been able to work around.
When exactly did you launch the mobile app?
Mid-November.
In November.
Mhm.
Okay.
All right, and I'm Ashley Sanchez. I'm going to read the intake update for us. So for the intake update, at the time of the last board meeting, we had noted that the enforcement report, or in the enforcement report, that the intake cycle times for complaints closed in the fiscal year 24-25 was 9 days. This cycle time did drop and return back to 9 days. And at the end of November, intake had 22 pending cases to assign, but this was due because the last day of November had fallen on a Saturday after Thursday and Friday were holidays. So there was 4 days that the board was closed where we were able to receive complaints that weren't able to be processed or sent to analyst. And at the end of December, the intake had 0 pending cases to assign. So
You may take over. Okay.
Oh, it's your turn.
And one of the things to note, and I know we've talked about it in the past, is with intake on our annual report stats, we typically will note this is the cycle time for intake, but that has to do with complaints that were closed. So it's not really accurate because you're talking about complaints that are sometimes a couple of years old. And so the time it took for intake to process those is not really what's happening currently. But we did parse that out here on the report. So it's 4 days as far as what intake is currently doing. So their cycle times are really solid, and they're keeping up with what's coming in. So intake is kind of like a good, we've checked it off for enforcement. It's doing great. Okay. So next section is investigations. Obviously, we've been talking about the complaint backlog for quite some time. It has been gradually reducing since the last board meeting. It did go up a little bit, so I don't think we were able to close as many, although if you look at what we were doing per analyst and the expectations we have, and I know we kind of had vacancies and everything, we're where we need to be as far as the closures per analyst. But I would expect that will continue to trend upward. So we'll continue to close those cases and cut into that backlog. One of the things that we've noted, and I think at the beginning of each year, I've tried to extrapolate how many complaints we're looking at receiving. And it seems like every year we're receiving more and more. So at the end of last fiscal year, so that would have been June 30th, we had 1,873 complaints, which was an increase over the prior fiscal year. And then this fiscal year, we're looking at being a little over 2,000. So it's still increasing. We're still getting more complaints year over year. So the work is certainly there, independent of any kind of changes to what we may enforce or may not enforce. Obviously, that can change things. I know that we've talked about the subject matter expert program, I think.
Can I just have a?
Yes, ma'am.
I just needed a clarification. So when we say intake and closing, that is when you get a case and you get to assign it to an investigator? What does that closing mean?
So it's two different things. So intake, typically what we're looking at is we receive a complaint. It's the time it takes for intake to process that and assign it to an analyst. So the case is not going to be closed at intake unless they see it's non-jurisdictional. So those types of cases, which are a very small percentage, would be closed at intake as non-jurisdictional. So they say, oh, I have a problem with this doctor, and let's say it's a medical doctor. It's going to be non-jurisdictional.
So what is the determination of the 9 days if there's like?
So the 9 days that we have, that's based on what we the investigations that we closed as a whole. So that case, let's say, was assigned back in 2021, 2022 at intake. It was assigned to an analyst. Obviously, it's taken us quite some time to process these and investigate these cases. So let's say a couple of years later, that investigation is closed. The 9 days represents how long it took for that particular case that's been closed, that was opened maybe 2 years, 3 years prior, how long it took intake at that time to assign it to an analyst. So it's not really giving you an idea of what intake is doing currently. So that's why I run a separate report to see, okay, what are we doing as of last month? How long did it take for, and obviously all those cases, the majority are still going to be open and they'll be open for quite some time, but it's showing how long it took for intake to assign those cases to an analyst.
Okay.
So
I was just a little confused with the closing part.
it
of
is weird.
okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I think for this and the annual report, there's a lot of data that kind of seems like it's like, okay, well, how does this factor into it? Or what segment of the investigation is that data representing?
Yeah.
So it does get confusing.
Follow-up
admittedly.
question.
Mhm.
For the investigations, do you have like statistics of like based on the cases that you received and what you call this assigned, how many is the percentage of those that for whatever reason, I guess, dismissed or what the categories are? Or for me, my mind is saying close, like you can close it because it doesn't require further
Right.
investigation. Or how many of those cases require,
An investigation?
an investigation?
Oh,
an
the vast
investigation?
majority. So
Yeah.
the vast majority of cases that we get, I mean, I would say are going to need an investigation, let alone a subject matter expert. It's well over 90%, probably over 95% of the cases that we get are going to require an investigation.
So you would say that all the cases that the office receives after it has been assigned to an investigator, 95% requires actual active investigation?
Well, all of those, if they've been assigned to an investigator, or basically a desk analyst, should require an investigation because they've been determined at intake to be jurisdictional. I mean, there are some that might fall through the cracks where they're right on the cusp of, is this jurisdictional, where it's, you know, the complaint might not have been completely spelled out. Sometimes these complaints are really not clear and we have to contact the complainant. Intake will do their best efforts, but there are some that fall through the cracks, and then we can resolve those right away. But yes, basically you can assume that if it's been assigned to an analyst, it's going to require an investigation.
Do we categorize our cases based on, I don't know, like the
allegation,
severity of
We
things?
do. We have a statutory priority
Like-
to prioritize. Yeah. So we have 8 priorities that are set in statute that we can prioritize.
The reason why I'm asking is I want also people, like especially members of the public, right? Like have an understanding of what the team is up against.
Mhm.
Not every case is the same, but if we are able to put a number of, like, you know, there are cases that are, I would say, easily concluded, right? And, you know, if we're able to at least give them a number of, like, it's not like everybody's just sitting on cases, because that seemed to be
No.
the impression. I would have to say.
Yeah,
A
it's
lot of people are always like talking, like asking me, because they get, you know, we've been waiting and waiting. And even if like for explaining the fact that there's a whole process, but I also want to make sure that it also is being recognized that there are some cases that are being, you know, processed quickly compared to others.
But it's also why we've had an influx of how people complain, because they've learned the process of, if I say one thing, the perception is that it will move my case
it's a high
to a
priority.
different category and make it a higher priority because they've learned the process. So I think that's something that we're working on, though, and why we're working on the things that we're working on right now is to fix that.
And I think as an aside, based on what you were saying, at my prior board, there were a significant percentage of cases that were what you would deem like, oh, these are easy. You know, it doesn't require a lot of legwork or investigation or even an expert involvement. But those cases that are assigned to analysts from intake that are jurisdictional, I mean, almost all of them are going to require a reasonable amount of legwork. We're really not getting a lot of cases where they say, this person was rude to me. You know, where we go, okay, this is, you know, non-jurisdictional, or this is easy, or this is a simple, very simple compliance issue. And at my prior board, we would have things where they said, oh, well, you know, the advertising is off here. And that's extremely simple to process and get through. And that's a really quick turnaround. Here, we're not getting those. The vast majority of cases involve standard of care.
Do we have an average of like last year, just
Yeah.
for last year?
Yeah, so Dr. Solcito, if you look at attachment 1 in the memo, in the very first section is consumer complaints at intake, you have the number of received and the number of closed without referral for investigation. And you can see there the year to date, we received 867 and 56 were closed without referral for investigation. And you can see from prior years that number continues to grow, that we are closing them at intake.
Dr. Bradbury,
Dr. Bradbury had a question.
Oh, I just wanted to point out that, and I think I was reading it in these, in the MDC complaint audit subcommittee, that they're looking at rewording some of the statute and some of the it's not really prioritization, but am I remembering that they're looking at like taking out
Yeah, so the board
Remember?
asked for them to look at the complaint prioritization statute. And then the board also changed the verbiage in the statute. Instead of listing out the specific license types, they changed it to individuals, which then could include unlicensed individuals. So they then, if an unlicensed individual was involved in allegations that fell into 1 through 8, they would be included in the priority. They're also looking at what they actually have implemented with the consultants. We had a discussion about the fact that the statute specifically states that they're prioritized based on the allegation. And so our team, when looking at them, a lot of the allegations, our team are assigning if it involves negligence or serious bodily injury to the animal, our team is putting it as category 1. When the consultants look at those cases to determine whether or not a subject matter expert is necessary, they're also letting us know if they agree that the allegation is a priority 1. And if not, then they'll let us know so we can assign it a lower priority. And so hopefully that'll help with the resources.
Thank you.
I can go to the next section too. I know we talked about subject matter experts the last couple of days, but as usual, we had another roundtable meeting, which we have quarterly for our consultants as well as our experts. So during the consultant meetings, we went over a few items. Some of the more important reminders was just the timeliness of the reports, basically having good communication with the analyst who's assigned to the case. And I think the communication is the big piece of it. So if somebody can't complete a case, just to let us know right away, because a lot of these cases are already kind of lingering. So just communicating with the analyst, hey, I can't finish this up, or you might have to reassign this to somebody else. Just telling us earlier. One of the other things that we went over during the expert roundtable, which I know comes up, every now and again, is just avoiding opining on what the gold standard would be in a given situation, or this is the way I'd like it to be, because they're supposed to be opining on the standard of care, which would be just the minimums, and I think that's something that just bears reminding. And so that we had a discussion about that during the roundtable, and just some of the other just housekeeping type of items, size of the reports. I know we've gotten some pretty large expert reports at times, and I think some of it is could be more concise, just easier on the reader. And a lot of times when the reports are that big, sometimes they're not as easy to follow. So it's going to automatically require a phone call with the expert to figure out, hey, what did you mean here, or this and that. So I think working on that. Obviously, we had some of our veteran experts attend so that they could give their feedback and some of the tips that they've learned. And I think that was really useful, because I think during these meetings, it's really nice because it is a good way for our experts to come together and ask questions in what I think they feel is a kind of a safe environment. Because a lot of times when these experts are writing up their opinions, they're kind of unsure, like, is this good? Is this bad? What's the feedback? Which of course is one of the other things we do with the complaint audit subcommittee, is reviewing those, providing that feedback to the experts. And they seem to really appreciate it. And then one of the other things is our DAG liaison, Neva Tesson, also did a presentation on basically the testifying hearing process from the AG perspective, because I know that's kind of an unknown to a lot of our experts. It's extremely rare that our experts have to go to hearing, but I know that a lot of experts do get worried about it, like what is it going to be like, and what if I mess things up? So I think that kind of pulled the veil back on that, and hopefully made a lot of our experts a lot more comfortable. But they seem to be really appreciative of these roundtables, and hopefully they'll be continue to be well attended, and we can continue to have good topics to bring up during them.
Have we been able to entice any equine practitioners for expert anymore? I think we've only had one in the past. Do we have any more?
I think we actually have one that we're working on. I'll have to check with Brett, but I think we do have one who is interested, who
Okay.
we're getting under contract. I believe we do. I'll have to check my emails, but I'm pretty sure we do.
Okay.
I know as an MDC member, I attended the training. Are we able to do that as board members?
We request that they don't attend those because they're roundtable discussions with the subject matter experts, and they could have a discussion regarding cases that might come before you later. And I think it would be not advised to attend.
I think even for the newer members might be helpful sometimes to see a process. That's why I say just lay out just a simple thing.
We
Okay.
do have
know we have.
recorded webinars that if they're curious about the processes, the webinars they can attend, but the roundtable discussions are very specific for the subject matter experts and cases they're reviewing.
Yeah, I'm talking more about the original training when somebody first starts and they get that training as an expert. Is there any discussion that, just the original, if you're going to be an expert witness or if you're going to be a subject matter expert or you're going to be a consultant, any type of training like original onboarding.
Yeah, we currently don't have an initial training. It's all part of this roundtable discussions.
Yeah. So they have the guidelines with the examples, and then obviously they'll typically contact me if they have questions about the process. But a lot of times we want them to, see what is in the examples and kind of say, okay, well, this is what a report should look like. Here are the things to avoid that are all kind of spelled out. And then a lot of times during those roundtables, they can say, hey, I ran into this, or, what do you all think of this particular thing? And those conversations can get into the weeds a little bit, but it's good that they have other licensees to discuss that with, because I can help them with the enforcement side of it or maybe the process side of it. But when it comes to those, granular details about standard of care and whatnot, it's really good to have them have that discussion. Oh, I think that was it for me.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, right now, the main bottleneck is that there's a lot pending for experts, right?
We do, yes. We do have quite a few that are waiting on experts. I know we have picked up a few new contracts, but I know we've also lost a couple of experts who have said like, hey, I don't have time for this, because obviously there is a hefty time commitment. One of the other things that I kind of touched on here, but I really tried to hit home, and then some of our veteran experts also tried to echo it, is just the importance of when you're accepting a case, you don't figure, okay, I'm going to be able to finish this case in 2 weeks and then I'm done. Because the expectation is, you opine on that case. Typically, we're going to send a potential violation letter to the respondent. They're going to provide some kind of response. We're going to need you available to review that response and then let us know, hey, do you still stand behind, your findings? And then after that, if we decide, let's say, to cite that person, we're going to need you to be available to listen or even possibly attend, depending on the context of the citation, that informal conference, and let us know, okay, did what they said during the conference change anything? And then, of course, if it does go to hearing, they need to be available for that. And I think there's been some times where we've lost our expert along the way, or they've gotten so bogged down with either personal, professional, activities that they haven't been able to respond. And that's why one of the things I was saying, hey, it's better just to let us know right away, hey, I can't do this, so we can send it to somebody else, because there are times where it's, I want to give someone the grace of, hey, they're already involved. There's 3 cases. I don't want to send this to another expert, because that just is a mess. You have another licensee involved, and they have to make sure they agree with the original one, and maybe they don't. But switching horses midstream, I think is a big problem. So I think I was really trying to hit that home, and we have lost a couple of experts, I think, who just, I think, couldn't commit to what they've seen as the required time commitment of some of these cases.
And I know we talked about this a long time ago, but just to revisit, is there any thought that paying our experts more might help keep them, or
We're looking into
incentivize
that
them?
as well. Yeah, I'm trying to get some data regarding what we paid, I think, for all of our experts over just the prior year to see what it looks like, and then see how feasible that is. I did send out an email to our experts to get some feedback about the program, and the payment was mentioned by maybe one or two people. I don't know that that was the big, hey, I don't want to do this because of payment, because I think the payment in itself is almost like most experts will say, like, this is almost, pro bono work with the amount that we pay, because we're state agency. But I think we want to look at that to see if that's something that we could feasibly do.
And then lastly, is there any mechanisms in place if we have experts that we don't think are representing us well or presenting us the proper standards?
Yeah, so we're going to receive the feedback not only from the analysts. I think they'll let us know right away, hey, there could be something going on with this expert. But then we're also having the complaint audit subcommittee review some of these reports. We're also, if there is maybe, let's say, a red flag or a perception of a red flag that one of our analysts brings up, we'll typically involve one of our consultants to take a look and see if they think, like, okay, this could be an issue. And we have had consultants reach out to the experts just to gauge the situation, see that they do have an understanding, because the last thing we want is for somebody to be opining on the standard of care and for one of our consultants to say, this is not correct. And I will say that we have lost some experts because of that. So we are definitely looking at that, because that's the last thing we want, is to invest all this time and obviously money in putting forth a case that is not warranted.
I would like to say that, just for public record out there, anybody who wants to listen to this, that we're in a catch-22 situation. And I think that some consultants and experts need to realize they get overwhelmed by the number of cases, which makes them not want to assist because they don't want to get overwhelmed by the workload. And so then that puts us in another situation. That's the catch-22. They
Mhm.
don't sign up, they don't help,
Right.
but they want to stand on the sidelines and complain. And to quote Dr. Dick Sullivan, you can scream louder from the inside. So, like, volunteer, because it's a volunteer, you get paid, but we know, as you just said, it's about helping. We are here to help the consumer, but veterinarians can help the profession by making it better for the consumer by being there and become part of the solution. So we need more.
Yeah.
Don't complain about how the Veterinary Medical Board is not here to help if you're not willing to step up as well.
And I think one of the things I always try to, because I'll typically talk to someone who will be interested, and they'll say, hey, I'm interested in this. Can you tell me about it? And I'll set up a phone call and we'll discuss it. But one of the things they ask about is the time commitment. And realistically, I'm telling them, hey, we're just appreciative to have you be willing to help. So there's no minimum. Obviously, people get busy with their jobs and personal life, but if you say, hey, I can do one case, I mean, that's one case. So, one is better than zero. So really, anyone who can help, it's much appreciated. And I think that's something that I try to, just state every single time I talk to the experts and consultants as a whole is, it might not feel like a lot, but it is making the difference. And without them doing that, we wouldn't be able to function at all.
We also did lose Dr. Maniak as our expert. I'm just saying.
I didn't want to call him out, but
Yeah, I mean,
Okay, so we also have an update on probation. So the probation monitors are actively investigating 37 pending enforcement complaints against 12 probationers. Currently, there is one petition for early termination and one petition for reinstatement that are pending with the probation unit. Since the last board meeting, 2 licensees began probation, and so there is now a total of 53 probationers, 8 of which are told right now.
That one pending petition for early termination was heard today. So there'll be one pending after this.
Yes. this was prepared before today. So yes, one was heard today. And that was the update for probation.
All right, I guess we're moving on to agenda.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
24D for outreach. Who's doing that?
Thank you, enforcement team.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to the A team.
Not the E team.
Okay, I'm providing the outreach report. So just providing you with updates since the October meeting. Some of these items we've already touched on, obviously, in the agenda and some of the previous reports, so I'll just keep it kind of high level. Most of these updates also pertain to listserv announcements, email announcements that go to our subscribers. I'd say a majority of these listed here are such announcements. The first one, back in October, October 10th, we sent out an announcement to our subscribers indicating that we were recruiting for inspectors to serve as inspectors for the board's enforcement program. Subscribers were notified that there was specifically a need for inspectors in the Bay Area. Moving on, also in October, we sent out an announcement regarding the CDFA's announcement of the 2023 Feed Directive Summary Report. This report presents an up-to-date illustration of the Veterinary Feed Directive, feed manufacturing and distribution in California. The annual summary report has been developed to provide a transparent and thorough explanation of the AUS program's involvement to ensure feed manufacturer distribution compliance with state and federal VFD order mandates. And some of the highlights of that report are provided there. And then over to page 2. We talked about the inspection seminar back in November. We notified our subscribers about the webinar on November 1st. Again, the webinar was a collaboration between the DEA and the board. During the webinar, DEA and board inspectors walked through their respective processes. And as a result, we issued 314 CE certificates to eligible attendees. And in December, we provided a link to that webinar on our website. We've also discussed the unlicensed practice stakeholder meetings. On November 4th, we informed our subscribers about the November 18th stakeholder meeting. It was a 1-hour meeting hosted by the Unlicensed Practice Subcommittee of the board's MDC and focused on the topic of unlicensed veterinary practice related to small animals. The input that we got from these meetings basically was fed into the legislative and regulatory proposals that you approved yesterday. In November, we informed our subscribers about our December 6th RVT applicant education requirements stakeholder meeting. This was a 2-hour virtual meeting hosted by the RVT subcommittee of the board's MDC. And again, the purpose of the meeting was to evaluate the education requirements for individuals applying for board registration as RVT applicants. And as mentioned, we did get a lot of input from stakeholders on this item. I think we received over 200 emails, received quite a few public comments. I think we had over 70 participants in the December 6th meeting, and then we had a subsequent meeting in December. And again, this was an item you reviewed yesterday and approved regulatory language for. Let's see. Okay, next moving on to page 3. On December 4th, the board informed its subscribers and social media followers that the FDA issued a letter to veterinarians regarding the use of aspirin products in lactating dairy cattle. And a copy of the letter is provided on page 3. It's also available on our website under latest news and announcements. Bottom of page 3, as mentioned, we are having another webinar at the end of this month, January 28th. This will be a misbranded drugs webinar. We notified our subscribers about this webinar back in December. We'll send out another announcement next week, about a week before the webinar, just to remind people that, or give people the information to register for the webinar. And again, CE credit will be provided for the attendees for this webinar as well. The next item listed on page 4 references the SB 669 and AB 1399 FAQs. As you recall, these were approved by the board earlier this year, April. They are available on our website. We had requested that OPA, Office of Public Affairs, create some flyers for us. So we do have those available. And I guess we're determining what our next steps are with those flyers. I have a couple of other updates that are not in the memo. On January 7th, we sent out another listserv announcement about a FDA letter to veterinarians about adverse events reported in dogs treated with Librela. That letter is also available on our website. And then on January 10th, in response to the LA fires, we sent out an announcement regarding a Board of Pharmacy waiver. We had been receiving calls from veterinarians impacted by the fires requesting changes to their address of record. And they had concerns about continuing to receive medications for their patients at their address of record. But the waiver allows for medications and devices to be delivered to alternate locations at this time. So we provided a copy of that waiver on our website. I'm sorry, to our email subscribers. And then also on the topic of the fires, last week we were contacted by the DCA Office of Public Affairs. We were informed that the governor's office, through agency, had requested that state agencies begin using their social media platforms to amplify messaging about the state response to the LA fires. They specifically recommended that we repost content from the governor's office, Office of Emergency Services, CAL FIRE, CDPH, et cetera. So we've been doing that since last week. They've also asked that we report back to them daily our social media activity. So that's been going on since last week. And then lastly, I was just going to mention, as you may or may not know, our agency name officially changed on January 1. We're now the California Veterinary Medical Board. So we've begun the process of updating our logo. So we hope to have some mock-ups for you at the next meeting. I do have a meeting with OPA tomorrow to initiate that process. So we're excited about that. And that concludes my report, unless you have any questions.
Like that kid in class that you're always like, really? A couple questions. One is, are we going to do anything about the HP, the highly pathogenic avian influenza, disseminating information?
Yeah, Dr. Solcito brought that up yesterday, and I think we'll have to work closely with CDFA and and create some information to disseminate.
Great. If we can include the fish and wildlife and, yeah, just as part of that. And then I seem to recall that the cannabis guidelines were going to come back around in 2025 because we were waiting on some other group to create some rules, and I just didn't know if we needed to put that back on the radar.
So we're monitoring it closely. Cannabis, we did have a meeting with don't know their acronym right now, but we did meet with them regarding their pending regulations and provided some input there, but their regulations still are not done. And so once their regulations are effective, then we'll look at the impact that it'll have on the cannabis guidelines.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And the last item for Agenda 24, is it the strategic plan? Strategic plan? Is that you, Ashley?
I got that.
Oh, Matt.
And you should just need to hit share, Justin. I pulled it up. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we just have some updates for the strategic plan as well. As you all know, after the board adopted the strategic plan, staff along with DCA's solid team created an action plan identifying 191 tasks to be completed within the 4-year period. We've attached the strategic plan objective tracker with updates in completing the strategic plan. As of January 3rd of this year, 37% of the objectives and 49% of the tasks have been completed. So it's an awesome start. Board staff began by reviewing objectives and tasks outlined to be completed in 2024 into 2025. Some of the task target completion dates have been updated in red text in the attached strategic plan objective tracker. Objectives with multiple tasks were updated to allot the initial time outlined for each task as we updated the time we needed to complete them in. So even with the updated target completion dates, the board is still on track to complete all objective trackers within the allotted 4 years. And in addition to the updates to the deadlines in the table, the staff is seeking clarification on objective 3.3, which was tracking the type of complaints received. And we just want a little bit more clarity on what was meant by types of complaints. Thank you.
Okay, I can talk again. Are you done?
Please. Yeah, please.
Yeah. I think, at least for me, in my mind, types of complaints would be telemedicine versus conventional equine, small animal. I think that was part of what we were thinking, because there's a lot always, like, as we're allocating resources and various just discussing issues that we're having, it often comes up, well, how many complaints are there about this? Or, we keep saying there's many, but there's, we don't have hard numbers. So it's,
So you're looking for methods of delivery, which would be the telemedicine versus brick and mortar, and species types.
I think that would
Large
be a
animal,
great
small
start
animal.
and see how hard that is.
I think we're currently tracking method of delivery. So we have that. But if you want to break it up into subgroups of small animal, large animal, or if you want to be even more specific, I mean, the more drilled down you, because there's so many species. So maybe if there's some guidance on what groups you would like to see, then we could do that.
And maybe the consultants would be a good person to group it when they are, going through it. But I think the species would be good. But then, like, there's shelter versus private practice, so I don't know how detailed. I think the species to start would be a good beginning, but.
Okay, so now we just want to make sure that we're even when we go to the consultants, they understand what the board is requesting. But now when you're saying shelters, you're now getting to method of delivery, species, and then type of premise. Is that, I just want to make sure we're doing what you're asking for.
I'd love to hear other people's opinions.
I think it'd be interesting to know whether, how many cases were involved with malpractice and negligence, where people thought that they were harmed in each of the different species.
Okay, so malpractice, that's civil, but we do track the negligence allegations currently. If we if we start collecting by species, we would be able to make that tie to the species and the allegation.
I think the species can be just small animal, farm animal, and equine. Those three.
Are you all okay
Yeah,
with
I
that?
would
And
agree
then
with that.
obviously there would be an other category for
Yeah, so that's
reptiles,
what
fish, exotic.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
Yeah, that's what I would, that's what I was thinking from this
Okay.
is that would be the species and not,
Mm.
doesn't need to be a total breakdown. And delivery,
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
And we're gonna have to start, I mean, I think that in order to be able to provide not nebulous information, we need to be able,
Well, we are.
Dr.
we're
Solacito, do
doing-
you think it's necessary to break, shelter versus?
In a way, yes, because the the thing with shelters is because you tend to look at them as a group, but also with the needs of like individual animals being taken care of. So
Right.
I just feel like the inquiries may be different rather than like with an owned animal, you know. Now, yeah, I know. That's why I'm quiet here. I don't know where it's gonna get complicated.
Yeah, I think if we started with the small animal, equine, livestock,
General
yeah,
categories.
and saw how that went. But I just know that they're very different complaints that are going to against shelters, right? Because it's not usually, but maybe they're not. I don't know, but it's.
So, are we wanting to separate out shelters or not?
I think for starters, we could make it simple by doing it by species as we know it, like
How
more
Dr.
general.
Manick just wrote
Yeah,
up.
yeah.
Okay.
And then maybe later on, once we get, more information, maybe we will see if there's further need to kind of diversify the categories.
Okay.
So.
Okay. And then the only other thing, just moving on to back to the strategic plan, to the objective regarding defining livestock, you can see that was 4.16. All of them were deemed completed except for actually pursuing the legislation. But based on the discussions yesterday, it sounded like the board is requesting to leave the livestock definition alone. So we're going to close that item out. Okay. All right. Anything else regarding the strat plan?
It was on let's see here, a lot of ones, on 1.1.1.1, it says 924, the board, will seek additional clarification, or the EO will seek additional clarification from the board during the October meeting about AI and chatbot. Did we get that handled in
Yes.
October? Okay,
We did.
thanks.
And I just wanted to do a shout out to the team with only the first year down out of the 4-year plan. We're nearly 50% done with all of the tasks.
yeah, well done. Thank you, guys.
Okay, now we open the floor for public comment for Agenda 24. And we have public comment from the room.
Hi, Grant Miller, California Veterinary Medical Association. 2 comments. One is on the outreach. We'd like to just preemptively thank the board for creating the misbranded drug webinar. As a profession, I think we're very just unaware of not only what misbranding is, but also the specific laws, both federally and at the state, that govern that. And we're very much looking forward to the misbranding webinar because our intention is to write an article in our magazine following that webinar to help the profession better understand misbranding. And then as an instructor at the UC Davis Veterinary School in this area, I'm really going to try to incorporate that into the curriculums that we have a better just overall feel for it. So thank you for that in advance. My next comment, I'm compelled to comment in addition to Dr. Sarah Roos, who you heard yesterday during open public comment, seems like ages ago. But if you recall, Dr. Sarah Roos is a board certified internal medicine specialist, also the technical vet at Boehringer Ingelheim and the president of the American Association of Equine Practitioners. And she had mentioned that she wanted to stress to the board that when equine veterinarians are administering omeprazole to their patients, which is largely in the form of either Gastrogard or UlcerGard, which are two almost identical products. They are identical products made by Boehringer Ingelheim. That scoping the horse in putting a camera down into the horse's stomach is not necessary to justify the prescription of omeprazole. Omeprazole is labeled both for the treatment and prevention of ulcers, and it's very common for us to make a clinical diagnosis of ulcers based on the horse's behavior, and also to give it just preemptively if a horse is anticipating something stressful like a show or traveling. I personally give it to most pregnant mares because we know that 100% of pregnant mares in their third trimester will have gastric ulcers. We also know that 68 to 80% of all horses have gastric ulcers. So you're usually betting with the house if you're making a presumptive diagnosis. So I'd just like to re-stress to the board and to the enforcement folks that the messaging to equine practitioners we're hoping would not involve the statement that we should not be giving UlcerGard or Gastrogard to horses without first scoping them. Thank you.
Okay, moderator, could you please open up public comment for online participants?
We are open for public comment on all of 24. If you would like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise your hand. And as a reminder to our mobile device users, you may need to hit the ellipses button, that's the ... in order to find your hand. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment online. Seeing no additional requests for public comment, do you wish to continue?
Yes, please. Now we move on to agenda 25.
So members, for future meeting dates, we have posted on our website the rest of 2025, which is April 16th through 17th, July 16th through 17th, and October 15th through 16th. We do have dates for 2026 that should be posted on our website shortly. It follows the same trends from this year. However, for January 2026, we'd like to move it to the third week in January versus the second week of January, primarily due to the holidays and the challenges that we faced with a lot of the subcommittees being out for the holidays. We wanted to push it out to the third week. So we're looking at for 2026, January 21st through the 22nd, April 15th through the 16th, July 15th through 16th, and October 14th through 15th. For future meeting agenda items, we have the items that were mentioned yesterday that are coming back to the board that the MDC is still currently working on. And we have from today, it sounds like the desire for the MDC to look at the regulations regarding MSM and potentially requiring them to get the certification in order to do the direct supervision with to perform MSM with direct supervision, and then also the request for them to look at the standards when dealing with remains up until the point that the remains leave the premises. Any other items?
Any comments from the board members? No violent reactions with regards to the dates?
Public comment.
Okay, now we open it up for public comment for people in the room. Okay, there's no comments in the room. Moderator, could you please open it up for our online participants?
We are open for public comment on future agenda items and next meeting dates. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise your hand. And as a final reminder to our mobile device users, you may need to hit the ellipses button. That's the ... in order to find your hand. We're going to take just a few more seconds to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request, do you wish to continue?
Yes, please. I guess this is where we end. We will be adjourning and we will see you in April. Thank you very much.